Okay, terrific. All right, hi, I'm Jocelyn Swisher. I'm bringing the Ad Hoc Housing Element Committee meeting to a beginning. I guess we'll do roll call first. Laura, you want to take that away?
Jeff Alves,
Here.
Amy Armsby,
Here.
Sue Crane,
Here.
Sarah Doherty,
Here.
Eric Doyle, Bill Kelly,
Here.
Ann Koff-Sill,
Here.
Andrew Pierce,
Here.
Al Sill,
Here.
Nicholas Targ, Bob Turcott,
Here.
Janie Ward,
Here.
Sarah Wernikoff,
Here.
Helen Walter, Chair Swisher.
Here. Thank you. Okay. It looks like on the in terms of the public attendees right at the beginning now, we've got 16 people in attendance. We can kind of keep an eye on that as the meeting goes on. Okay, so I'm going to do my little spiel here about oral communications. So persons wishing to address the Ad Hoc Housing Element Committee on any subject not on the agenda may do so now. Please note, however, that the Ad Hoc Housing Element Committee is not able to undertake extended discussion or action tonight on items not on the agenda. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes per person. So does anybody have anything that they want to say at this point regarding anything not on the agenda? Okay. Then looks like we can go on to our first item.
I'm sorry, through the chair, we do have hands up from members of the public.
Oh, I need to move that over, I guess. I'm trying to be able to see Sue Crane at the same time. All right, we do. Okay, sorry about that. Rita Gomez, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for taking my comment. I appreciate that on the timer you have the number of meeting attendees. The public is appreciative of that, not just me. And as this meeting continues, this group continues, I hope to see some of the undergrounding people from that committee as part of these decisions moving forward, and also the geosafety moving forward, because we can't plan zoning and looking at the packet. There's all kinds of information about the safety element and housing and deadlines, and we can't do that without understanding the geosafety of this town, and also some of the undergrounding. I know that some of the money from COVID relief that came to the town was being used to look into, to study undergrounding of the PG&E lines, but we haven't heard any updates. And so I don't know if this group is overlooking what that cost might be or what the planning is for the future, but somehow in one of the groups, I hope to hear what the outcome is of that and what the plans are. But I would really like to see those two committees in particular being part of these discussions, because our safety is, without safety, we have no town. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Caroline Bertongen. Caroline, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Thank you so much. I would like to give two general comments. First of all, thank you, Rita, for bringing that up. That's an interesting point, but also we residents in Portola Valley have requested to be transparent. And once again, the documents that were supplied by staff do not fully inform the new members of this new committee of the history of what all has been done to ensure that this community stays the way it is, but I have to the way it is which change. So meaning that we want to preserve our natural habitat. We want to really embrace this beautiful nature, but we're ready for change. And that was established with many hours of community collaboration. And that's how we established the general plan. Please make sure that, the Stanford Wedge in the general plan, which was adopted in 2015, Stanford had no request to develop that land. And somehow staff did proceed with the procedure, even though, even our fire marshal Inea really did not want to have Stanford built their buildings there because of several safety issues and stuff. And we can go on. But there's other things, that are not mentioned in your report and that you need to know. We had already 3 community meetings. It was with 21st Element or Heart or whatever. This was an organization by San Mateo County where community members came again together before 2019. And we tried to have a collaborative approach. Nothing is in that report. Again,
Thank you, Caroline.
there's nothing.
Yeah. Hey, can you just wrap up quickly, or your time is up? Sorry. Okay, I guess, all right, Ellen Bernatza. You have 2 minutes, Ellen.
Yeah, hi. I just have a question. Have you taken into account, or do you even know about the petition that was accepted by the California Fish and Game Commission to list mountain lions as a threatened species under the California Endangered Species Act, which is CISA? And we are located within the area that they are talking about, deeply into it. And I don't know if you know that Woodside itself has gone through this, and they've given that in their minutes, they have given that Woodside in its entirety is a habitat for a candidate species, which is the mountain lions. No parcel within Woodside is currently eligible for an SB9 project. And I spoke with her today, and she said no SB9 projects can be built by law in the habitat, the mountain lion habitat area. And even though it hasn't been totally adopted by the department yet, because they have accepted the petition, we still fall under that law. So no SB9 building can be done until they have actually either not adopt it for some reason, or if they change it just a little bit. But at this time, no SB9 building can be built within the habitat area. And I just didn't know whether you were aware of that or have addressed it at all.
So, Ellen, at this point, we're just taking comments. We're not having discussion.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
I can mention, I think we've got our council here and staff, and maybe at some point later in the meeting, this could be mentioned, whether we're aware of that. But thank you. Okay, I think we're through the comment period. Now we can get going on to the first item of business. Laura, do you want to take it?
I'll actually be doing the presentation.
Okay.
Chair Swisher, thank you. And I apologize, I can't get my camera going tonight. I'm just getting an error message, so you're just going to hear my voice.
So this is Adrian Smith.
Yes, correct.
Senior planner on the town staff who's going to be presenting. So you're presenting on behalf of the ad hoc committee of committees?
No, actually, this is a separate agenda item.
Okay, let me get back to my agenda here because I'm.
Oh, pardon me.
Presentation number 1, summary of ad hoc committee of town committees.
Okay, Jocelyn, you're right. I got my items mixed up. I apologize.
Okay,
So
okay. Which one are you doing, just Adrian, so we know? Are you doing affiliated housing?
Yes, correct. So
okay.
I'll jump in later.
Hold on just for a few minutes. We'll come back. Thanks. Okay, so Judith Murphy, are you here with us as a panelist?
I am here.
There you are. Hi.
Today. Hi. So
okay.
So we have a lot to do today, so I'll just forge ahead with this.
Yeah, it'd be great if you could just introduce yourself, please.
Sure.
I'm
Judith Murphy. I've lived in Portola Valley for 30 years. I was chair of conservation until the other night for 9 years. Now I'm vice chair, and I'm the chair of the Town Committee of Committees for Ad Hoc Housing. And that's the report I'm giving tonight. The Committee of Committees met on January 11. This is a committee that's rarely called into existence. Every now and again it is. And because the town was wanting various avenues for resident input, it got activated for this process. We met January 11, 8 town committees were in attendance. We had an overview summary presentation of the housing element update by Senior Planner Adrian Smith, material that you've all seen before. And then each committee representative had a turn to express what was most important to their committees when considering the housing challenges facing the town. And then we discussed one another's requests and recommendations, which was by far the most valuable part of meeting together. And rather than repeating to you each committee's list, I'm going to summarize the discussion, starting with the topics where there was the most consensus. Number 1 was safety, emergency prep, wildflower, and bicycle pedestrian. Traffic safety committees all had specific safety concerns. Their priorities were handling increased traffic volumes while protecting pedestrian safety, adequacy of infrastructure for evacuation, and all the many ways that landscape, hardscape, and siting can maximize fire prevention. We urge all ad hoc members to be aware of the safety implications of all of their decisions, even if not safe. If safety doesn't seem to be on the table when you're talking about something, remember that safety is behind everything. There was a consensus that the safety element should not be subservient to or lag behind the housing element process. There was a concern that by the time ad hoc committee, you must make important zoning and planning decisions. The safety element of these decisions will not yet have been thoroughly discussed. There's general dissatisfaction with this kind of cart before the horse timing. We understand that important information, especially the updated fire maps, are not available still. And the staff, in fact, has begun working on the housing related parts of the safety element. But the public part of the process with introductory meetings and opportunities for resident input should not be given short shrift and should get started as soon as possible. There are many experienced, knowledgeable, and overly educated residents in our town who can participate in the safety element planning. Because they've chosen to live here and know our circumstances, they are able to make uniquely valuable suggestions that expensive outside consultants cannot, and they shouldn't be left out of the process. Number 2 was the preservation of the unique qualities of Portola Valley. As you all know, the town was created specifically to preserve and enhance the natural quality of the area. It was the only reason we were incorporated. Its semi-rural atmosphere, its views of the Western Hills. Increased housing could destroy this, or it could fit relatively unobtrusively into town, depending on the zoning and planning code changes enacted at your recommendation. There's an inherent conflict between the logic of putting most development along major transportation corridors and the fact that those same roads are our dedicated scenic corridors. Specific setbacks for buildings exist, but there are no official setbacks for hardscape, and so parking can extend all the way to the front property line along the scenic corridors. No landscaping at all is required. To prevent the mini mall look that we might get if we have a number of developments along these roads, there should be codified a 6 to 8 foot setback for hardscape and a mandated vegetative barrier between the road and parking. No building should be permitted to block existing views of the Western Hills, and some standards for landscaping space between this landscape vegetative barrier in the road and the building should exist. The trail system is at the heart of the pleasure and privilege of living in Portola Valley. Nothing should be changed that puts our trails at risk. Protection of trails should be increased as much as possible. It's a travesty to allow buildings or fences to block the trails. Our parks and open spaces should be fiercely protected from development. Rezoning should not make it possible to build on any of our public parklands. The demands on fields and courts has been increasing Despite our stable population, they will be under greatly increased strain with increased use from increased population. The town should be not merely protecting our parks and open spaces, but proactively looking for ways to increase them. We recommend that you authorize a variety of types of housing and affordability: tiny homes, communal housing, co-housing, clustered housing, pocket neighborhoods, varying sizes of multifamily housing. A variety of locations should also be authorized. While larger multifamily projects should be more central, all neighborhoods should be expected to make some contribution to complying with the mandate for increased housing. A well-designed fourplex masquerading as a new mansion can have little visual impact on a larger lot. New development should not be ghettoized. It would be bad for the social fabric of the town to put all or most low-income housing in one area and create a wrong side of the tracks here, which we have never had. Again, virtually every decision you make will impact the natural ambiance of the town. Please remember this, even if it seems peripheral as you are considering individual items to discuss. 3 was sustainability. Sustainability has become a core value for the town. For some years, we have enacted REACH codes. Our building codes are more focused on sustainable building than the state requires. High energy efficiency should be required. Smaller units should be supported. Alternative forms of transportation should be pursued. The specifics of each committee's request can be found in the minutes and the recording of the meeting that we had. We ended up spending more time than anticipated expressing concerns, making requests of and suggestions to this town staff about process rather than suggestions for ad hoc itself. So we went a little sideways, but they seem to be really important to many of the members who came. So I'm just going to highlight them briefly. There was apprehension about the ministerial process. We were reassured that ministerial approval is not an automatic approval, that while it means that applications can no longer be required to be taken to and commented on by Trails, Conservation, ASCC, and Planning as has been traditional, it does not mean that no conditions can be set. But any condition must be objective and consistently applied equally to every and all projects. Checklists can be designed to ensure that aspects of development important to the town and its unique circumstances are requirements for permitting. The Trails Committee started this process and submitted a checklist to the Town Planning Department last summer. Each committee is being asked to suggest items to be included on the checklist to make sure that this the town is able to leverage what control we have over the sort of quote automatic ministerial approvals that happen. There was concern about communication, timelines, and transparency. The resources for understanding the housing element update on the town website are numerous and valuable, as you all know. They're both on the housing element update large button on the homepage and also on the webpage that Ad Hoc Housing Committee has for itself under resources. But some information resides in one place and other important information can only be found on the other, and there's very little cross-referencing. These resources should have links to one another from both sites, and the FAQs need to be updated more frequently so that residents who don't stay in careful touch with this process by coming to all the meetings, as some of us are able to, can stay updated. Some residents express frustration with not knowing about relevant meetings or getting background information enough time to study it. While notice is given for all public meetings by the staff beyond what is required by state law, in fact, the high level of interest in town suggests that it's important to try more, even redundant push notifications and to make the background materials as far in advance as possible rather than just at the time that's legally required. A good deal of time in our meeting was spent asking staff questions. I'm not going to go through those here. You can find them in meeting minutes or the recording of our meeting. Our recording is at the housing element update under the community meeting sections. The answer should be found in the near future on updated FAQs. Most of those are questions that Many of them were things that members of this committee have asked of staff before, which is one of the reasons I'm not going through them. People who came to the meeting or were there as residents don't know as much about the detail of the process as those of you who've been to every meeting and been paying careful attention every month. The Committee of Committees will meet again in about 2 months, late March or early April. And before then, each town committee was urged to put ad hoc housing on their agendas again and to discuss and prioritize their specific suggestions for adding to the checklist to be applied in the ministerial approval process. All the chairs and their committee members and the public are urged to stay as current as possible with the housing element process as this ad hoc committee continues to hold monthly meetings and hear pertinent reports from constituents. Thank you. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Judith. I have a question for you. The summary that you were just sharing with us, is that available online?
Not yet. I think the minutes were taken and Laura's staff is still working them. The recording is available because
Yeah.
I looked it up to see before the
Okay.
meeting, before I said it was, to make sure
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah.
But I don't think minutes per se are not available yet.
And then were you just sharing kind of an executive summary of?
Right.
Yeah.
I thought that it would be boring to just say, this committee said, blah, da, da, da,
Yeah.
da. This committee
Yeah.
said, da, 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 da. So yeah, in our discussion, we talked a lot about one another's suggestions, and some of them were, people were going, oh yeah, we never thought of that, and absolutely. And so I tried to outline then the general topics that took up
Yeah.
most of our time.
That was
and,
really helpful. I'd
what
love
some
to get a
detail-
copy of those comments so that our whole committee can have them.
Sure, I can do that. I can,
Maybe
How-
share with Laura.
I'll give
Adrian.
it to Laura and Laura can distribute it to you
Yeah.
however she
Okay.
sees fit.
That's great. That would be helpful. And just keep it in our files as we go forward. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, so first I just wanted to call on Sarah and Jeff, Laura, to see if you have any responses, comments to anything that was brought up. Go ahead, Sarah.
So I just wanted to say for those of you that weren't on this meeting, that it was an incredibly well-run meeting. Judy, you did an amazing job. There was a lot of information to digest for that meeting. So this is a meeting again, where, the town has 14 committees. And so each of the 14 committees, this was their opportunity to get up, to share their feedback on the housing element. And so they came to the meeting with feedback, as Judy just shared, that is relevant to their specific slice of the world based on their view through their committee. So there was a lot in there, and Judy did a great job. And I think there was a lot of good, output of it, as you just heard. And I think a lot of it is actionable. So a lot to distill, but I think actionable. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Jeff, do you have anything you want to comment on?
Yeah, I'll just add that, it's not often that the committee's chairs actually talk directly to each other like this. So there was a lot of discussion. I'd say we all learned quite a few things just because, none of us get to cover all those meetings individually. So there was a good exchange of just individual, just various stories, things that have happened, things I wasn't aware of. I'm sure that others weren't aware of also. I thought it was very helpful, and I agree that Judith ran a great meeting. Some of the questions that were brought up, especially around the safety element, we did try to address, and we will be addressing again as we go forward about how that's going to fit into this process. But I thought it was, overall, I thought it was a good discussion. So thank you.
Yeah. Laura, anything you want to add at this point?
Just that staff agrees that it was a really excellent discussion and that Judy did a really nice job of leading it. So we appreciate everybody's feedback and participation in that meeting.
Yeah, I'd love to get your comments just before we go to questions from the committee in terms of the safety element timing. When you look at our updated timeline that you share with our packet, it looks like it's running slightly ahead of our process, but pretty similar in terms of getting the draft public review, agency review. Can you just share why you're comfortable with why that, is going to work in terms of getting the input to the housing element?
Sure. As this committee knows, but maybe not all members of the public know, and we're kind of trying to fit all these pieces together. as we work through this. The safety element and the housing element are on a very similar timeline. And we have qualified consultants that are helping us with both of those areas and a good overlap. So what we've done is we've front loaded some of the work of the safety element that was needed to inform the work of this committee, particularly in the area of site selection, so that you can look for sites, particularly for multifamily housing. So that's a lot of what the last meeting on fire safety was about. And then we're going to be getting recommendations from Zeke Lender, our fire safety consultant, and reviewing those with Don Bullard from the fire district, our fire marshal, and we'll be bringing those materials back to you at an upcoming meeting. So we're trying to pull the relevant pieces of the safety element and bring those to this committee. And then in terms of the remainder of the safety element process, we'll be at a council meeting discussing the public participation aspects of that. And we've got, our existing committees that are going to be reviewing parts of the safety element. So we'll be talking about that in an upcoming we'll be talking about the safety element in more detail in upcoming town council meeting. But we think we have pulled what we need into this committee's discussion.
Terrific. Thank you so much for addressing that. Okay, so we're going to now get questions from our rest of our committee. Helen, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks. That was a great presentation. I'm super interested in hearing how many acres of parkland. Obviously, we have a ton of private land in town, but under the Quimby Act, we'll start with national. The national average is 10 acres per 1,000 residents nationally, and according to the National Recreation Association. And then under the Quimby Act for the state of California, generally it's 3 to 5 acres per 1,000 residents. Considering we've been static at around 4,600, I think, residents for about 40 years. I'm curious how many acres of park. Obviously, we've got Windy Hill. I'm just curious, we're going to have Hawthorne soon. So, and then Trust for Public Lands does do the 10-minute walk to public space, and because of our trail system. So I'm super curious about how many acres of park we have, of open space we have in town, and whether, I'm assuming that we are far beyond the 3 to 5 acres per 1,000 residents for our national average. Whereas East Palo Alto barely has any parkland per 1,000 residents. And we don't have any impact fees or any of those type of community benefits. But I'm just curious, the Conservation Committee, is anything based on data in town, and how, so I would love to know that if possible.
I don't know the acreage, but I do know that the large open space parcels are not controlled by the town. They belong to MROSD. So we have they're within our town limits, but we have little or nothing to say about how they're used and who can use them. I think Parks and Rec was speaking primarily about our fields and, the small parks we have, Town Center, and the land adjacent to Ford Field, and those small parklands where it's if you don't want to take a hike, where can you go with your family to have a picnic? And not everyone lives on 5 acres so that they can do that in-house. And I think they were looking at the demand, the increased demand for the courts, for example, and the playing fields, and wondering how that's going to be able to stretch as we become a more populated town.
Right, and the prioritization of field space is always tricky. Okay, but we don't have any data on how many acres of open space we have, do we?
I don't, and it would be interesting. I expect one could calculate it out, and it would be interesting to know both the total open space and the more traditional town park like stuff too. Both those numbers would be interesting.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Thank you. I also want to thank you, Judith, for a really excellent presentation. And it's clear that with the process that you're chairing, you can gather, really deep knowledge in the community about these various topics. So I think it was really great. not to suggest work for other people, but I too would benefit from a written version of the presentation you just gave. So I hope you can send that to the committee. A couple questions. What I definitely find most helpful is concrete suggestions. So all of us want to preserve our rural character, but how? And so I found your suggestion about, to prevent the mini mall look, use mandatory setbacks, require vegetation between the development and the roadway. Concrete, specific recommendations like that, I find very helpful, more helpful than sort of the general broad stroke goals. The input that you provided reminded me again that it is so critical, again, just speaking for myself, I think, for us to hear from residents and for residents to participate and share their views and their suggestions. I think it's really powerful. A lot of the things that you mentioned, avoid ghettoizing, distribute the burden throughout the town. It's not clear to me yet how to achieve that. So that's going to be a work in progress. But as going forward, as you can have an opportunity to provide specific suggestions, would be really helpful. Those were my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, go ahead, Sue Crane.
I wanted to ask Judith, when you was the meeting conducted by Zoom?
Yes.
And it was a meeting of all the committees, and was it accessible to the public? Did they have questions?
It was a public meeting. It was noticed as a public meeting.
Yes.
So I think a lot of people saw it on the list and thought committee of committees, that I don't know what that is, and I think we only had 4 or 5 members of the public there. But it was noticed. We did it by Zoom. We did the whole Brown Act number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Sue. Go ahead, Janie.
I just have a comment. Would it be possible to replace using ghettoization with a less offensive term like distributed housing?
I understand what you mean. And my fear would be that when you say distributed housing, it's a little non-specific and bland and doesn't get at the heart of it, which is you don't in fact want to create an area where lower income people are sort of corralled in part of town. And so, it's a word that's a little fraught, but I'm hard pressed to find another word that expresses what we mean quite so well. I'd be really delighted to hear a substitute I could use that really got it across in a way that has some oomph to it, rather than sort of vaguely let's be careful and distribute it. So yes, I know what you're talking about, and I'm sorry, and I can't think of an adequate other word.
Well, because my view of, especially multi-family housing and creating communities of distributed, income levels within the town, with a little more positive spin on it.
Right. Well, that's exactly what we're hoping, is that it should be positive. It should be distributed. It should be that, now in town, there's enormous range of incomes and wealth in town, and it doesn't seem to be a barrier. And I just think it would be a shame if as we develop, it becomes a thing when it hasn't been one.
Well, and I live in a multifamily community, so I have a perspective of, the uniqueness of our community, and we have a very strong community that supports one another. And I just feel like we want to, have kind of some integrity with how we refer to people of lower income levels. It seems like we could describe it better. Thank you.
I think that's something we could all work on. I think that's a point well taken, Janie.
Yeah.
And you're at Woodside Priory, where it's a wonderfully diverse, exciting community. I want to also just remind people that, the housing element, the target numbers are not just, low income housing. It's really spread across the spectrum, low, moderate, market rate housing. So we are looking for diversity across income levels and other aspects too. Yeah. Okay. We'll go on to Sarah Dorahy. Thanks, Janie.
Thanks, Janie. Those are really good points that you're making. And Judith, thanks always for your volunteerism in town. You're a wonderful example of how great it is to be in this town and the people who give so much time, keeping it the way it is. So I was heartened to hear about this notion of a checklist, because I feel like if we have, if we're all working together to build a list that helps maintain the integrity of the town, then we might get a little bit more support from some of our residents who are vocally against any development in town. So I think that, my question would be how prescriptive can this checklist be without it being a barrier to development? Because our job, our mandate here is to make these, to fix the zoning so we can build the houses, so we can start to alleviate the housing crisis in this state. So, how extensively, how much input can we have into a checklist like this so that we can build multifamily housing that sits quietly in the landscape? I always come back to that expression, like that's our job, to find something that's not going to detract from the rural nature of this town. So again, maybe it's a question for our town, just whenever you build a house here, it's not an easy process. So if we're going to look at ways to introduce, a significant number of new houses into this town, how can we do it so that they fit quietly? I mean, some of the more recent developments in this town look like giant commercial buildings and a single family lives there. So it kind of kills me when I hear people complaining about development when we let it happen all day long. So there are some very big houses with, very few people in them. So I really think that there's a way we can do this so that we can have, attractive housing. Like, look at Scandinavia or, other European countries that build these places successfully, or areas in the United States that maintain their historic downtown. Like, can we have a way that we are maintaining our rural, bucolic environment? Like, that's something that should be protected. So can we do that successfully and move forward with the development that we've been mandated to build? Not build, but make room for.
Right.
So I'm sorry, it's a long-winded, I don't say much in these things.
No, that's okay.
Now,
I think, well, Laura's the one who is the expert about this. My understanding is you obviously can't put on the checklist something that's designed to subvert the process, that makes it impossible for someone to build. So you can't do things like that. But things that everybody that comes along is subjected to, for example, a setback, the state has given the 4-foot setback, but I can't imagine that we couldn't require a landscape barrier, that we couldn't have a little rule in the same way we say the building must be 50 feet back from the road, or 75 feet back, that the hardscape can't start for 6 to 8 feet. I think something that's very concrete, very specific, applies to everybody who comes down the road. And I know that when Trails did there, for example, and it actually would be interesting to hear Laura speak to the process of how we get these checklists actually enacted and enforced so that they start being used.
Laura, can you jump in and address that?
Let me just say one thing before,
go
and that is Trails, for example, on their checklist said you couldn't have, if you build an ADU, which can go up to 4 feet, that you can't have generators and things on between there and the trail that would be dangerous for the horses. So that's very objective, very specific, and hasn't been approved by the council yet, but I assume it will be. Okay, Laura.
So Judy's general description is very good, and her examples are very good of the types of things that we can do. In terms of compiling the checklist and bringing them together, we still have to work out the process in order to do that, because Trails really initiated this idea, but the committee of committees really built on that and the suggestion that multiple committees could contribute that kind of information. So staff will be trying to bring those things together, and then staff and Cara, the town attorney, will look at those for legal review and make sure that we agree that they're objective, because they have to be objective, consistent standards, and make sure that we don't see them as going kind of too far in terms of precluding development. And then we might have to do a little back and forth with the committee chairs if we come up with any of those things. So the idea would be to take all of those checklists. They're going to have some things that are overlapping, right? Which is really interesting to find, and then find a way to bring them together. And then they'll most likely, from what we can see so far, apply to ADUs, SB 9 units. And then depending on the work of this committee and where we end up with different housing types, you know, certain things that would apply to multifamily for kind of different settings that projects may get developed. So that's as far as we've taken it so far, but more work to come. And we can certainly provide updates to this group.
Thank you. And I'm curious, just in terms of moving the concept forward, is it checklists that our committee would put forward for the town to review and possibly approve, or are they generated and reviewed and approved through different committees or parts of the town?
We have to continue to think about the process. And so we'll probably do that with the committee of committees next time we meet with them, kind of talk about that process. This specific committee has a large charge already.
Yeah.
So we may bring something to you so that you're aware of what's being proposed and it can feed into other work that you're doing. But I don't know if we'll spend a lot of time here reviewing it if the committees spend a lot of time on it. So we'll have to balance that.
Yeah, that sounds like a worthwhile thing to think about. Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks.
And just one more thing, I'd love to hear more from residents, from different residents, some new voices, from people who might have examples of fantastic, you know, housing situations that they've seen on their travels or in other parts of California. Like, I think it would be great to have some productive, as Bob says, concrete examples of things that we can take inspiration from as we move forward with this process. I think that's a really important step for all of us. Inspiration would be great.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Okay, Amy, go ahead.
Well, as sometimes happens, a lot of the comments and observations that I was going to bring up have already been covered. I just want to lend my support to Janie's comments. I do not think we should be using the term ghettoization. I'm sensitive to the need to try to find the right words, but I would just say from my standpoint, that is certainly not the right word. And it matters. The words we use matter. So I just want to sort of emphasize that. Also, I just appreciate so much what Sarah Dorahy said about, you know, trying to harness the, and Judy as well, and thank you both for raising that point, trying to harness the experiences that residents have had, their own observations about what kinds of techniques or approaches might work in terms of integrating housing into our existing community. I certainly believe for myself that it is possible to do. I think the idea of a checklist is a great one. If we can come up with objective criteria that, as someone observed, don't create a barrier to affordable housing, then a checklist would be wonderful, you know, provided it was approved by council, because it is very tricky under SB 9 and the regulations to try to create criteria that are truly objective, but also are not undermining the spirit of what we're charged with doing, which is making affordable housing, removing some of the barriers to affordable housing within our community.
Great, thank you, Amy. Helen, quick question.
Sorry, I was muted. So first, thanks for everyone's great comments. I just wanted to also comment on the idea of the setback, having worked on the SB, excuse me, not SB 9 setback, on ADU setbacks. Because of the way the town code is written, you know, if you have a driveway through your parcel, for instance, then you have to do the setback from that, not from the front line. So then if like a 50-foot setback turned into, on my parcel, 125-foot setback. And you're, you know, the site that you're trying to build on, and I'm trying to keep costs down and not cut down trees, then that really changed things. So I just wanted to mention that, because oftentimes I hear about setbacks and, you know, that you're still required to match in our city, like the primary residence and other high standards. So I would just, no one wants something right next to someone else's lot, even though now we're allowed to build up to 4 feet away. But I would be cautious about setbacks because sometimes it has adverse effects too. So
we were talking about setbacks along the scenic corridor. So just along the main road, so that when one drives through town, it still looks like Portola Valley instead of, looking like a whole, I mean, in theory, a lot is going to get built along there, and which is great in many ways, but it would be terrible if what got built along there was a whole lot of buildings fronted right up against the road and no vegetation in front of them. It would just destroy the feeling of the town as you drive through it.
Right, and it is unfortunate that we do have a lot of parking lots right on that scenic corridor. Like sometimes it's nice to have something that not car centric, right? A community building centric or something. So thank you.
Thank you both. Okay, I think now we're going to turn to the public. We have now 22 attendees from our community who are participating. I see a hand up by Rita Comas. Go ahead.
Greetings. I was one of the few residents that was actually attending that lovely Zoom meeting. And Judith, you did an exceptional job as chair for that particular meeting. It was mentioned that 14 committees in town were part of that meeting, but the Geo Safety Committee, which I think is very important when talking about housing, was not there. The Underground Committee, especially since some people in town couldn't attend because their phones, their landlines weren't working and their internet was still not working since December 23rd. So they could not attend that meeting. So I think it's important that the Underground Committee is part of these conversations for the Committee of Committees. The Finance Committee, in thinking about how are we going to pay for these things for the future that we need, could possibly be part of the committee and of committees. And then and someone else mentioned that the open space group was also not there. And for us to move forward, we need to have, if there's 14 chairs at the table, all 14 chairs need to be filled with people that represent us in this town. As someone else had mentioned, it was the first time that different chairs found out about what's going on in different groups. And, this is an opportunity for everyone to find out what's going on and how we can plan for the future for our beautiful town.
Okay.
We do love this town. And I still have 24 seconds. And so
all right. Anything else you want to say?
But well, I shouldn't be cut off. That's all I'm saying.
No, I'm just trying to move things along. We're running a little over. That's
well,
all.
If I have 2 minutes, I have my 2 minutes.
Go ahead, 10 seconds. Anything else? No, great. Perfect. Thank you for your input, Rita. Anything you want to say to address Rita's comments, questions, Judy?
I said at the beginning that 8 town committees were in attendance. I think there were a few that, I don't know who all got invitations, but I know there were a few who just weren't able to be there. Mm-hmm. And I know that some of those committees had, in fact, we're talking in general, that their committees hadn't actually explicitly discussed proposals to bring to ad hoc, as was the function of the meeting, which is why our discussion sort of generalized out in many ways. But we were what we were. Yeah,
that's how it goes. But everybody's invited, right? All the committees, and you get who you get.
Right.
All right.
I wasn't in charge of that, so I don't know how that piece of the process went.
Got it. Okay. Laura?
I just wanted to confirm that all of the town's committees were invited to participate. And specifically with geologic safety, staff reached out to them several times to see if they were interested, because we thought that that was important, but everyone received an invitation to participate.
Terrific. Maybe next time more of the committees will be available. Okay, a couple more questions, comments from the public. Christy Corley, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if the Open Space Committee or if the two, I think, Mr. Kelly, were you on the Open Space Committee? And we were wondering the number of acres on that within our town are open space? Or can one of the council members answer this question? Because it is an important question. And I know you're having back and forth conversations behind the screen. So I'm wondering if we can get that answer by the end of the meeting so we can hear what open space we do have. Thank you.
I would guess that needs a little homework to be done and it won't be able to be popped up by the end of this meeting.
Okay. And what's the question again? Is how much open space?
How many acres of open space does Portola Valley own, not including the Mid-Peninsula? Hawthorns would be post, correct? I'm just curious.
Okay,
And,
so maybe we can, I don't know how we get the information back. At the next meeting, maybe mention it. Okay, Dudley Carlson, go ahead. Dudley, can you speak now?
Unmute on your end.
Hello? Sorry.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all of you, particularly Judith, but all of you on this committee for a really thoughtful discussion and for raising really important points. The 2 points I would address are to add to the importance of scenic corridors, that our scenic corridors are also our evacuation routes. And while I appreciate the comments made about the complication of the setback issue, I think setbacks from evacuation routes for fire safety is hugely important. The other thing is that I agree with the problem of the discussion about how to characterize the need not to separate low-income housing from everything else. We want it to be integrated into whatever it is that we're permitted to build. And I would think that some form of townhouses where there was a mixture of low, middle, and higher housing in a very small cluster in several different locations would be one way to address that. But I agree, we don't want a housing project. We don't want to use the term ghettoization, but we do very much want to make sure that the housing we're allowing is spread throughout the community to the extent possible. Thanks so much to all of you.
Thank you for your comments, Dudley. Okay, looks like we're done with the public comments. Anybody else want to wrap up this section and move on? Okay, so Judith, really, we thank you so much for coming and doing such a great job, not only working with your committees, but also just reporting out in a very kind of effective way. Thank you very much for being here. Okay. Okay, so the next thing, Adrian. We have an affiliated housing program, and this is a committee discussion. We're going to have, I guess, a report first from Adrian and then discussion. We have an hour and 15 minutes allocated for this. So hopefully we can kind of shoot to be done by 6:35, 6:40. Let's try to keep an eye on the time.
Great, thank you. Thank
Take
you very
it away.
much. Thank you. All right, so we'll get rolling. This is the affiliated housing program discussion. So our key topics this evening. First, I'll briefly cover the history of the program. Then I'll go over how the program has been historically implemented. And then we'll go into the discussion portion of this item where the committee will be asked to reflect on the effectiveness of the program so far and consider the shape of the program moving forward. So firstly, how the program is defined is that it allows multifamily housing on land zoned for institutional uses and is available only to staff affiliated with that particular institution that owns the land. So for example, under the affiliated housing program, only staff members can reside at any housing built on priory land. There are 5 program partners included, and that's the Priory, Sequoias, Stanford University, Ladera Community Church, and the town itself. While the Priory, Sequoias, and Stanford are the longstanding original partners, Ladera Community Church and the town were added as partners via council action in November 2013. So the very first mention of something resembling the eventual affiliated housing program was in the town's 1977 housing element, when employees working in the Portola Valley were identified as a group whose housing needs were called out as warranting review. It wasn't until 1990, though, that the town's housing element discussed 3 sites that could house multifamily affordable housing: the Sequoias, the Priory, and the Stanford Wedge land. The housing element also included a policy for the town to cooperate with affordable housing developers and to encourage housing for low and moderate income households. Separately but related was the creation of the new inclusionary housing program that requires all town subdivisions to either include market rate housing or pay an in lieu fee. In 2009, we see the program begin to become further defined when it's suggested that affiliated housing built at the Stanford and Priory sites should be limited to staff of each respective institution. Also in 2009, we see the inclusionary requirements for subdivision sites applied to the Blue Oak subdivision, with the idea that affordable housing be constructed or 4 lots be sold to generate funding to build an affordable housing project elsewhere in town. Come 2013, we see 2 major program updates in the town's housing element. The affiliated housing program is officially redefined to stipulate that only employees and staff affiliated with the institution owner of the parcel may reside in that affiliated housing. Additionally, the inclusionary housing program discusses the Blue Oak subdivision and requires the construction of inclusionary housing for any further subdivisions. And then also in the 2013 housing element is the introduction of a new program to explore the town's future housing needs, including the possible expansion of the affiliated housing program to provide affiliated housing on commercially zoned land. So a little bit about the program partners. In terms of how the program applies to the affiliated housing program partners, the Priory has its own approved master plan that includes a maximum allocation of 28 affiliated units. Currently, the unit count sits at 20. Stanford University doesn't officially have any affiliated units in town, as the Stanford Faculty Housing Project, known as the Wedge, doesn't actually make use of the provisions of the affiliated housing program, and instead uses the town's subdivision ordinance and state law. Similarly, the Sequoias don't yet have any affiliated units, and there are currently no active affiliated housing proposals from them. So our newest program partners were added via town council resolution in November 2019 and include Ladera Community Church and the town itself. As of yesterday, the town was formally notified by Ladera Community Church that they wish to develop on-site affordable housing in the next housing element cycle, and accordingly, they wish to be included in the town's housing sites inventory. So this is very good news for the committee and the town as we build out our town's housing sites inventory in this next updated housing element. As for the town itself, there's a current estimation of approximately 3 units that could be built for the program on land adjacent to town center. Regarding the formal application of the affiliated program, it's been included in the town's past housing elements for many years, but isn't actually codified in the zoning code. So currently the mechanism for implementation is via conditional use permit or CUP. So for example, the Priory's master plan that lays out its affiliated units is permitted via CUP process. Official codification of the program into the zoning code would be prudent to improve its legal standing. Codification would allow for program parameters and create a clear process for public participation in a given project's review. So this brings us to the discussion questions for the committee, and we ask that you consider the following. Has the program been successful in generating affiliated housing units as defined? Should the program be expanded, perhaps to include new partners? And should the program consider a less strict definition of qualifying residents? For example, should affiliated units allow for other kinds of residents beyond staff of a given institution? So I'll leave these questions here with the committee, and we can begin some discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. That was helpful. So are you going to keep the slide up?
Yeah, if you'd like, I can keep it up. Just to
Okay.
get going. And if you'd like to ask clarifying questions, the expert on the affiliated program is our town manager, Jeremy, and he's available for questions.
Okay. Okay, so I'm assuming when people from the committee raise their hand, they're going to pop to the top of my sidebar here. So I guess I'm going to ask if people in the committee want to ask Jeremy or Adrian or anybody questions or make comments. Let's do that first, and then we can drill down into the questions that are here for us. So go ahead, Judith Murphy. I see you at the top there. Then we'll go to you, Sue.
Okay.
No, I don't have a hand up. That must have been when I was waving them around.
Oh,
I
okay.
was speaking and they
All right.
they misread me.
Okay. Sue, go ahead.
Okay, as I look at these three discussion questions with a general answer, I would say yes, yes, yes. And if I start to think about them, has the program been successful in generating housing units as defined? Yes. And specifically, I look at the Woodside Priory and what they have done with their staff housing. They've done a beautiful job. They have supplied housing to their staff, to their teachers, and it shows a very good use of the Priory's property. And it shows that I think there is still more space and time for them to get to their limit at this point. If we can raise that limit, we can look at it and maybe define it in a different way. So the next question, should the program be expanded? Yes, it could be. It could be with different parameters. In other words, if we look at it and re-evaluate this, and with all these other questions and suggestions that we have brought up since we have begun this housing element, I think the program can be easily expanded. And it should be. Should the program consider alternative definitions outside the current? Yes, allowing workers not affiliated with a Sequoia has discussed this. Sequoia's, I think as they began this, to this affiliated housing, they were thinking about supplying supplying housing for their workforce. In other words, for those people who were working here, that they would be able to supply them living quarters, for those people who were serving the needs of the Sequoias. They did some investigation of this, but they haven't completed any any total study. But if a place such as Sequoia, such as the Priory, when they think about serving their own, I think they could also open up to serving the needs of the town to low cost housing. And I think that the way I see it, it's should be under discussion and exploration. So I think there's a way to consider this as a positive move.
All right, that's helpful, Sue. Thanks for that input. Anne Copsill, go ahead.
Great, thanks, Adrian. I had a question on number 2, when you said, should the program be expanded? I'm excited about that. It seems like a good program and could help in many ways. Did you mean, or what are the options for expanding? Are there other businesses or schools or institutions that we could include? Or you mean expand the number of housing units allowed or assigned to the already existing partners?
Adrian, you want me to take that?
Yeah, why don't you, Jeremy? Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Jeremy Dennis, Town Manager. This was meant to be a very expansive question, to take it in whatever direction you wished. The housing element as it's currently written does strongly suggest looking at expansion of the program in some way, but it doesn't define it as much. And just from a very limited staff perspective, that can mean a few things. None of these are recommendations. These are only meant as opportunity for something to consider. And the first is that, for any property in town, or for certain kinds of property in town that have a relationship to commercial zoning. So we have 2 commercial zoning designations. We could look at that as a proactive approach. We could certainly just say that that's allowed. Again, not a recommendation. The number of units is dictated by a variety of different other laws and guidance is discussed earlier, so for instance, subdivision law, what we can and can't do depending on the size of the lot and the like. But that could certainly be, something to consider from, I guess, a density standpoint, how many units you want. I think from the staff end, it was more, if this is an interesting program that should be reviewed and, taken in a different direction. I think one of the thoughts was the first one was around just bringing that directly to those 2 zoning designations in town and having that as an opportunity instead of waiting for an individual owner or institution to come forward and say that they'd like to do it and then get added to the program.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, I'm going to have to leave soon. So if I could jump ahead, I'm definitely like the idea of expanding the program. It seems like a good way for us to possibly be able to find new units and have it not, at least certain times of the day, it doesn't cause more traffic because people were already commuting in if they worked at certain businesses. Thanks.
I'm curious to get your input, and on just what do you think about having commercial enterprises in town build housing? So say one of the garages builds housing. It's either for employees or for non-employees. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, if it just left up to me, it strikes me as a great idea and way to use land. I'll have to hear other people's concerns or issues, but from the Planning Commission, it seems like an very interesting idea.
Okay, thank you. Bill Kelly, go ahead. What are your thoughts on these questions, topic?
Hi there. I think affiliated housing should definitely be part of our toolkit, but I am highly skeptical that this is or should be an important part of the solution for the town. I think affiliated housing is very attractive on the face of it, but when you start to think about it, it has some significant problems. The biggest problem overall, I think, is it adds complexity. and complexity when it comes to real estate development is the enemy of actually getting something done. I think we need to keep that in mind as a general proposition. In particular, the notion of affiliated housing adds complexity on a few levels in addition to the regulatory one. One, it has a history of working when it comes to educational institutions like faculty housing, like Stanford has near its campus. It also has a tradition of working in connection with religious organizations. That's why we have parsonages and rectories and convents and so forth. But it doesn't work very well for employers in the rest of the world. Number one, for the employees, you wind up tying their job to where they are allowed to live. And, you know, there's a reason why serfdom was not a good idea. So I think basically detaching the notion of what your job is determines where you can live is a good idea, except in limited situations. Also, it's not especially attractive to employers because if you have multiple employees, who are the ones who get to live in these units and how do you compensate others who don't get to live in these units? I think most employers, when they look at it, will say, no, thanks. I'm really not going to try to solve the problem that way. And then from a town's perspective, encouraging this as an important part of our solution is a way of saying, we really want to control the kind of people who live in this town. And I think that's a pretty unattractive proposition as well. So, you know, for all of those reasons, as I say, having it as part of the toolkit is a good idea. Thinking that this is going to be an important part of the solution or that it's going to serve the mandate that we have, I'm very skeptical about. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Good comments, Bill. Appreciate it. Amy Armsby, go ahead.
Hi. So I am in favor of expanding the program where it can be expanded, but I'm mindful of Bill's comments because I agree that as I've had some awareness of affiliated housing in other contexts, it does add a lot of complexity. That being said, I think there are some opportunities given the existing affiliated partners. That is, Priory has may have some additional capacity to increase their numbers. I don't think, and it sounds like the church, Ladera Community Church, may also have some ideas, and they have the land already. So, you know, it's certainly something I think we should be pursuing, but I agree it's likely only to be a fraction of the total number. And I think that's probably appropriate given the fact that it does create these additional levels of issues. I mean, there's the problem that I think Adrian pointed out as well, and thank you for the great presentation, Adrian. But there's the issue of how to enforce affiliated housing programs. Right now, it sounds like they're enforced through conditional use permits. That's complicated and not that easy to. I mean, it requires infrastructure to really make sure it's being used effectively and the rules are being followed. So I just think, yes, I agree that I basically would answer yes to all of these questions, although I do have some questions about the third one, just about what we mean by not affiliated. Do we mean entirely not affiliated with the institution, or do we mean perhaps not employed by, but having some connection to the institution? I was a little confused by by the language that's in the housing element and how it refers to sometimes to employees, sometimes to workers affiliated with an institution. And I would just, I don't know, just for clarification, if somebody could explain whether, you know, for example, for Stanford, we're talking, I assume, about faculty, but also potentially graduate students who are not, obviously not employed by the institution. But but when we talk about workers affiliated with a particular institution or persons affiliated, we're talking about just a general connection to the institution, I assume. But I just wasn't clear on that. But that being said, I do think we should look to expand where we reasonably can, but I just don't think that this is going to be the source of a substantial number of additional units based on everything I've seen.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I guess Jeremy, Adrian, do you want to address the definitional question that Amy was raising?
Well, this might be a little oblique way to do it. The definition appears to have changed over time related to affiliated housing. So at one point, affiliated housing had a relationship to the site and not the more specific elements that were incorporated in 2013, which tied the housing to those who worked at that site. So there was, to be fully transparent, our looking at the meeting notes and the conversations that were taking place in 2013 don't provide enough clarity in why that change was proposed. I can speculate in a few areas. One is probably that no one wanted to see any particular institution become a developer and have their own development wing, if you will. I hope does that help, Amy?
That does help. I mean, you actually phrased the question a lot better than I did, which is, what do we mean by affiliate? But it sounds like initially we meant the entities that we were going to partner with for housing, or that we were going to allow to create housing. But it's evolved into the affiliate being, those individuals who are somehow affiliated with the partner.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I mean, just to provide a little additional clarity, until this program was created, there was no opportunity for the construction of multifamily housing in town because our zoning districts don't allow that, regardless of whether they're commercial, residential, or otherwise. So this was, I think, a pretty creative way to get to solving that issue and having some opportunity to do so without making a significant change to the town zoning at that time. And I think it's an outstanding question as the committee continues to do its work. What is the place for the affiliated housing program, particularly if the committee does start to make recommendations around multifamily zoning in town, because that's where I think it came from. But again, that's just me reviewing historic records.
Thanks.
Sure.
Thanks, Jeremy. All right, thanks, Amy. Nicholas Tarr, go ahead, you're next.
Yeah, thanks very much. Jeremy, the question I had is, I think it may go to the issue of complexity, and that is Stanford moved forward with the CUP rather than affiliated housing. Can you shed some light on what may have gone into the thinking? I recognize that, of course, the university is the best person to comment on that, but it may shed some light on how well things are going, whether there are existing tools that can be used in its stead, or whether there are other kinds of tools such as floating zoning that might serve us differently well.
Just to reflect back, Nicholas, just so I make sure I have your question, it maybe rephrase it a little bit. Why Stanford chose one tool over another?
Yep. Yes.
I think it would be correct to say that Stanford is in the best position to share that. My sense is that the tools that they're currently utilizing for their application, and Laura, can you please jump in if I'm mangling this in any way, allow them to build to propose the type of project that they wish to do. Laura, do you want to add a little color?
Yeah, the town subdivision ordinance already has the inclusionary requirements. And so when they were looking at the type of project they wanted to build with faculty housing and with a below market rate component that would have a local live or work preference, the subdivision ordinance and the state laws that they're using, particularly state density bonus, achieved those aims. So that's our understanding of their rationale for doing it. So when they analyzed the town's affiliated housing program, the project that they were proposing was a better fit to go with the subdivision ordinance and state density bonus law.
I can imagine that that's right. In thinking it through, my sort of question is, given opportunities with density bonus and the games we are seeking to move forward, whether there are existing land use and entitlement tools that that make affiliated housing less attractive now than perhaps it might have once been. That's whether it's now an appendix and potentially redundant. I can imagine that we could sweeten it to make it more useful or beneficial, but in thinking it through, I'm missing the real advantage here.
I think that's an excellent question and one that we've been grappling with. We've talked to different people about projects they may want to do, and if staff has analyzed this and we've kind of moved through the process. So certainly one choice would be to not move forward with an affiliated housing program and to use some other type of tool, some other zoning tool to allow multifamily housing at different sites. So there's a reasonable argument that could be made that would be easier. As I've been thinking about this, I do see some value in keeping a program that has success in terms of building on the town's success. I think that's always a positive. I think that people that I have heard from have been very pleased with the 6 units of housing at Priory that was just completed. So that is a positive that we're building off from. And it may be a program where we actually have more flexibility than the multifamily zoning, because those properties may have unique characteristics than the properties that the committee may consider for multifamily zoning. So maybe there's 2 different tracks where a developer could have multifamily zoning in some places, and then an affiliated housing partner could have a different application process and more flexibility subject to the authority of the Planning Commission to meet the particular needs of that partner in that site. So that would achieve kind of that initial interest in not having these partners be developers, but truer to kind of the sense of partner with the community to develop something that would be kind of interesting or unique at that location. And that also, in my mind, kind of speaks to Bill Kelly's comment when he was saying we want to remove obstacles to development for professional nonprofit housing developers and for-profit housing developers if we really want to achieve RHNA build out. But for some of our affiliated housing partners, there may be a value of really truly working together through a detailed process to come up with the best product. So these are just things for the committee to consider to add some color to some of the conversations that we've had over the last couple of years.
So Laura, I think that before I'd have an opinion on this, I'd really need to be able to tease the affiliated housing program apart from the other tools that are available. So for example, would I be able to move forward with a PUD, for example, if a CUP wasn't available? Would I be able to move forward with multifamily with an affordable housing component simply using the new housing legislation from the last couple of years for significantly increased FAR as well as density? And I don't know if there's a limitation on structure type that is uniquely accessible through the affiliated housing. But I think that we'd really need to be able to tease apart what the advantage is in what we're incentivizing and what might be left out from the existing array of land use and and development tools that are presently available. It's a technical question, and I don't have the capacity to meaningfully respond to it with what I have right now. I could figure it out, but I think that the committee could probably, apologize to those people who have figured it out. But I think that some analysis and comparison would be super helpful, at least for me.
I think your comments are on target. It's a very nuanced and technical question, I think, that you're asking. So we would have to think about that. The town attorney also has her hand up. I don't know if she wanted to chime in on this particular topic, but certainly we could think about your comments. But I don't think I'd be able to respond in detail right now.
Sure.
Tara, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Just real briefly, the way I would respond to that is that I think there is still some benefit in retaining the affiliated housing program in that it permits multifamily housing projects or housing projects in general to move forward in zones where housing is not permitted. So for instance, if there was a commercial area that was zoned only for commercial use, and that particular, and I think we perhaps received a request for a housing unit on the car repair shop or service shop. And if housing were not permitted on that particular lot, then the applicant could use the affiliated housing program to permit housing. They would have to be added to the affiliated housing program, but otherwise, that would be the major benefit, I think, in retaining the program is for uses that don't currently permit any type of housing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Janie Ward, love to hear what you want to have to say about these questions and the topic.
Thank you. Just really briefly, I think the affiliated housing program is such a small number of proposed units that it's one piece of the puzzle. And one benefit to these kind of programs is the maintenance aspect of the housing, right? You have an institution or a property owner who's, they're incentivized to take care of the property, right? And keep it nice. And for example, at Priory, we have a very significant 5-page contract that we have to sign and agree to in order to occupy our unit, right? And so that also helps, we're all fingerprinted, background checked, it is a pretty over the top contract. But the other point I have to make on number 3 is we have an entire maintenance crew at Priory that is tasked with taking care of our housing, but they're from another contractor. So they're not eligible to live here, right? But they would love to probably, look into living at Ladera if something were open there, because I'm guessing many of their church members already reside here. So I don't know what kind of need there is for each affiliate, but that's something to consider. I mean, we depend on these people to fix everything that breaks here, but yet they can't occupy. So just something to point out.
Thank you. Great. Helen, go ahead.
I think such good comments. Has the program been successful in generating housing units? My understanding is the 6 units that Priory has built, that they're not willing to build anymore, is what I've heard, right? So I am concerned, with the cost of each unit in the Bay Area for a below market rate costing $750,000 to build for just one unit. not to be redundant to Bill Kelly and Nicholas Targ, but, you know, like that affiliate housing, if they cannot partner with an affordable housing developer, for instance, kind of what Laura Russell was talking about, I mean, it makes it really tricky to access some of the funds that are available at the state level if you don't have that upfront, you know, development experience. And then to actually to access the actual funds at the state level from HCD is incredibly tricky. So, you know, if we do want to meet the RENA numbers, if we're serious about it, I would definitely talk, you know, whether it's zoning, as Nicola, some sort of different zoning or something to expand the program. And I don't, you know, and I don't know what type of zoning we could do. You know, Nicholas brought up a PUD, which I don't see really working in the town, but if we did mixed use and those kind of, or, you know, something, other type of zoning allowances to allow for different, more flexibility around the use of the real estate parcels, so that people can be creative and come up with different opportunities and options so that we can meet, you know, whether, you know, so I just, did I have anything else?
Yes, Helen, I'm curious, are you talking about zoning changes vis-a-vis affiliate partners?
You know, like obviously some of our affiliate partners already own property in town, right?
Right.
So, but if you to rezone some of that land to make it, you know, oftentimes you don't want to rezone industrial land, for instance, service shops or whatever, and we don't have much of that, and our zoning isn't really industrial, right? But maybe to allow industrial and housing jointly or something like that. So that to give more flexibility.
Okay, and you're saying potential new affiliate partners.
Right, and potentially, you know, or potentially, you know, as Laura suggested, like, does it make sense to have the affiliate still? Because that was a backdoor to allow housing, or do we just need to scrap the affiliate potentially and create different types of zoning that would allow different types of uses on the land?
Gotcha.
Right.
Yeah, or both.
Or both.
Affiliate and right, deal with the zoning.
Right. And I do worry, you know, the Sequoias, for instance, has the affiliate and hasn't built. Like they are, you know, they are an elder care facility, and they have provide no housing for their staff. As Bill Kelly said, do you want it just for staff? I disagree with providing it just for staff, but to have that opportunity to partner, for them to partner to create housing opportunities, right? I think that could make it a much more robust possibility and affordable, because like mid-Penn housing, for instance, the way that they pay for a lot of stuff is once it's built and they get public financing, then they have the 55-year, the 75-year contract, and they then maintain it and operate it. And that helps offset their costs. And then they're not just a developer, but a long-term partner in the effort and provide the housing.
Okay, thank you.
Makes sense. Yes, thanks.
Thank you. All right. That's great, Helen. Bob, go ahead.
Thanks for all the great comments and answers to the question. It helps. I'm still struggling to wrap my head around what affiliate housing means exactly and what the benefits are. I understand that it allows an institution in the town to do development that would not be able to do otherwise based on the zoning. I wonder though, this is a question for Laura maybe. You know, these big employers like Facebook and Google and Apple face the same challenges Stanford does in terms of retaining employees, with the cost of housing being so challenging. I could imagine a Facebook buying a large parcel of land and wanting to put up a 253 unit project, which would solve our RENA challenge. They really wouldn't feel like an affiliate partner in the traditional sense. They'd be a property owner in town. And so my question, I think to Laura would be the best person to answer this is, would there be an advantage, if Facebook wanted to do something like that, would there be an advantage for them to go through the affiliate housing project to do that versus the traditional routes that exist for it? And I ask because I think your answer will help me understand what the, what the benefits of the affiliate housing program are.
As it's written right now, the affiliated housing program is focused on affordable housing. So that is kind of purpose and intent behind it, the way it's in the current housing element. So I don't think it would be a good model for someone like Facebook to come buy property and build housing for their own residents, because their own residents don't qualify for affordable housing in general, knowing of course that there are some that might, that provide certain types of services to the company. So I think it would probably not be a very good model for that. For something like that, they would more likely, if they were going to, using your example, buy a property and then be subject to whatever multifamily zoning laws we put in place, that, if they had an inclusionary requirement so that some number of those had to be affordable, that would probably be a path that would make more sense for that type of developer. So I would be surprised if something like that happened, unless this committee and ultimately the council made a decision to remove that purpose behind the affiliated housing program, to take away the affordable housing aspect of it and to open it up to general market rate housing. In that case, I don't see a lot of value anymore in having the affiliated housing program. It's probably best to address that just in zoning, as opposed to through a special program. Is that helpful, Bob?
Yes, very helpful. Thank you.
Great.
I just want to ask a follow-up to Bob's question, Laura. Is with the affiliate housing program, my understanding was that the affiliate has to actually own land in town already, as opposed to being an employer outside of town. Is that right?
Yes, but I think we're just thinking ahead. So if we say we're going to expand the program and then people bought property in town because the program was expanded, or because there was an opportunity for multifamily housing where there hasn't been one before. So, no one has come to town to buy property for multifamily housing because it wasn't allowed, right? It was only allowed for the affiliated housing partners. So it will be a change in the dynamics and the economics, presumably.
Yeah.
And Jocelyn, your question sort of gets at something that was unclear to me. Is the definition of affiliate partner a property owner who operates in town, or is it any property owner who owns property in town? That part wasn't clear to me. My understanding, Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it doesn't matter whether they operate within town or not. Stanford doesn't. Simply owning property allows them to be an affiliate partner. Is that right, Laura?
That's my understanding. As Jeremy indicated, the program changed over the years, and there wasn't a lot of attention to the specific words as it was changed, or perhaps there was attention to those words, but we can't go back into the specific minutes to understand their intention. So that's what Jeremy was kind of explaining. So we don't know for sure what the intent was. It's been understood and interpreted to be people who own property, since Stanford owns property but doesn't operate in town. Same thing with Ladera Church. The property that they're interested in potentially developing in the future is within the town limits, but the church is just outside of the town limits. So if that is helpful to kind of think it through, but these are the types of things we want to make more clear in a future version of the program.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then I'm sort of struggling with this idea about, as it is now, the employees and staff affiliated have to, are entitled to live there, but not people that don't fit that requirement. Some people have mentioned that in their comments, but it's an interesting thing. And it seems to me like it's really up to the institution that is the affiliate to decide who's going to be living in the housing. It can't be something that's imposed by the town the other way. We can't tell Priory that they have to allow non-employees to live there. But I guess the way that the program's written, Priory would have to come to the town to get approval to allow non-employees or non-staff affiliated with it to live there, right?
So right now, there's not a way to approve that because of the way the housing element is written. So if the Priory wanted to build units and rent them to someone that was not an employee, not affiliated, they would not be allowed to. So this is one of the things that we wanted to address. And we've heard people over the years say to us, I want to live in town, but not immediately on the site where I work. That maybe it would be nice to live at one affiliated housing site and work at another. And then as any program like this is developed, we would have to be really thoughtful about fair housing laws and make sure we're not discriminating against people. So I just mentioned that as always a reminder that we would need to be very thoughtful about that.
But Jocelyn, can
yeah, Sue, you want to jump in? Then we'll go to Jeff Alves next.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question. So what if there, so low cost housing, and so what if there's teachers, firemen, people who work or service the town of Portola Valley? Are they, can they be from the participating partner, the ones who might be able to live here? So either at the Priory or the Sequoias, that they could apply for housing, and again, a partner, and they have the school, nurses, whatever, low-cost housing of people who work in Portola Valley.
Laura, you want to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the idea, if I'm understanding your question, Sue, is that a lot of the employees that work in town, the actual places that are located in town, would qualify for affordable housing.
Correct.
A lot of the people who work outside of town but live in town wouldn't necessarily qualify. So it would be teachers, it would be town staff, it would be, do you know what I mean? Kind of employees of different commercial businesses, institutions, churches, all of those things.
But are we talking generally speaking, or are you talking in terms of affiliate housing?
So I'm talking in general, in terms of thinking about how the committee may want to shape the program going forward. So it kind of depends on what policy goals you're trying to meet. So I'm trying to add color as you think about the different policy trade-offs.
So allowing workers not affiliated with a particular institution access to the program. That's who we're talking about, those people. So in other words, the teachers, the firemen, whatever, possibly to want to live on the land that maybe the Sequoias would open up to those partners, or Stanford, or whomever is in this program.
Yeah, so the way to do that would most likely be to take off the requirement that they be employees of that particular institution.
Yes.
And then institute what we call a preference program, so that those units would be rented or sold, depending on the situation, to people who either live or work in the community. So that's a common way to do it. And a preference program, if carefully crafted, could comply with their housing laws. And if there was no one that met that criteria, you would still have to rent it if there was someone outside that, you know, met the affordability criteria. But we would expect that there would be people who either live and work in town that would qualify.
Yeah, and so you're saying the town could institute a preference program, and then Priory has to, or, you know, any other affiliate has to abide by that. If they don't fill their housing on campus, say, with employees, then they could fill it, they would have to fill it with other people working in town. Is that what you're proposing, Laura, with that preference program?
Well, certainly there would have to be conversations with the existing partners, right? So we haven't gotten to that stage of the conversation. We wanted to have this one with the committee first.
Yeah.
So we haven't talked to our particular, to their partners in terms of their preference going forward, but it's kind of a question about what type of flexibility do we want to create? So if Ladera Church, for example, wants to be able to develop housing that would be generally available to all lower income people, that might be different than what Priory is asking for to just continue their existing successful program. So there'd be follow-up conversations that would need to happen.
So it could be adopted by the partner and not imposed by the town. That's what you're saying. To be participant in a preference program versus the way it's worded currently. So
Yeah, I think we'd have to think through those details, but yes, I think you're correct.
Okay, I'm just trying to, all right, go ahead, Jeff.
So I don't have any specific recollection of the 2013 conversation, although I'm sure I was there. I will say just generally, when we talked about affiliated housing back then, the definition of it as applying to employees of those institutions, I think it was there largely because that was what the institutions themselves were interested in. The prior, nobody at the time was saying they really wanted to build housing and then just rent it out for anyone. They really were. The prior in particular has, I believe, used this as sort of they consider it sort of part of their recruiting and retention process. And Janie, feel free to jump in and correct me if I'm wrong on this. I think that the Sequoias, when they talk about this, potentially has the same. Again, I think up to now we've worked with people who were using this as a tool, specifically to kind of help out with their own employees who do not make as much money as other employees elsewhere. So this idea of expanding it beyond that is, I don't think anybody was sort of looking for that in 2013. So we're looking at a question that probably I think has more relevance possibly now than it had back at that time. That's the only thing I can add right now, because again, I don't remember the details of it. I don't remember that change to it being affiliated with the institutions being controversial at the time. I think I would have remembered that. I remember it mostly that this was just the institutions themselves were looking at this. It was their primary interest was that it was a tool for them.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Go ahead, Sarah Wernickoff.
Quick question. One thing I've been thinking about as everybody's been talking is this preference program. I'm curious if there are examples of, it sounds like other communities do this, because it does feel like at odds with fair housing. And so I just would want to make sure, I'm just thinking about it in that context. So I'm wondering what the examples would be, because I'm sure the devil's in the details there. And I guess another thing I've heard people talk about, and I'm wondering if there's a way for us to get our arms around this a bit, is, we make this assumption that people who work here want to live here, because we all want to live here because we think it's so awesome. But maybe they don't. And I'm wondering, should we understand a little bit more about that before we make that assumption, or do we actually already know that? And I don't know, I just have one riffing thought, like it might be interesting just to do like a quick poll of the staff at PVSD, if a program like this were available, would they be interested, yes or no? Because maybe it's a lot more than we think it is, maybe it's a lot less. And I'm not saying PVSD is the only, but they're obviously one of the bigger employers. So just a thought.
Okay. I think everybody's, so I guess, could you just check to make sure your little hand to participate is turned off if you're
I had another
asking your questions? I see a lot of hands up still.
I know, I actually did have another comment.
Okay, so we're gonna this will be our last one then, Helen. That was you speaking, yeah, sorry. And then we're gonna go to see if anybody from the town is participating, has questions. Go ahead.
I just wanted to address what Bob Turcott said about a company buying land out here, which obviously they could do to develop. However, I just wanted to note that Google was forced to do housing by the city of Mountain View, for example, when they, as if they were building their 3 million square feet of office and commercial in North Bayshore, it was you must then build housing. And Google was, did not want to get in the housing game. So I just wanted to point that history out. Obviously others could buy. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. I mean, I guess I just want to say something and then I'm going to go to the other comments. That I kind of agree with Bill's point, I guess, that, you know, this is a toolkit. It has been helpful for our town in providing more diverse opportunities for housing for employers here. But I agree with Bill in that it seems to me it's like a tool that we have in our toolkit, but it's not going to be solving the problem that we're here to kind of work on generally. I guess that's my view. All right, we'll go to the public questions. David Latina. I see your hand is up. Go ahead. And Adrian, maybe at this point you could take away the slide. I think we're done. Thank you. Go ahead,
Can you
David.
hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm
Hi.
Dave Latina, and I am the chief officer, one of the chief officers at Sequoia Living. And we are a unique organization in that we have about the same number of units of market rate continuing care units like we do at the Sequoia's Portola Valley, as we do the number of affordable housing units serving very low income seniors. So we're one of the few organizations that in the Bay Area have about 700 units of market rate CCRC housing and about 700 units of affordable housing for very low income seniors using the tax credit program. What I want to speak to is, from an employer's perspective, how this program has engaged us in the dialogue about increasing workforce housing for about 8 units on our campus. We've done, because of this program, we've invested about, I think the last time I checked, it was about $120,000 in studies with architects, geological folks, financial consultants. You know, we've been looking at every aspect of where we could develop more units. And as many of you have said, it's been very self-serving as an employer. If you can imagine all of you faced with the same concerns about fires, about power outages, about smoke, about, you know, just all the impacts that we've been dealing with, environmental and safety concerns about evacuation. How do we get our, and then you layer onto that as an employer, our safety of our residents and our staff are primary. There's always the first things we look at. And yet there aren't first responders living in Portola Valley. There aren't fire folks living in Portola Valley. We're very vulnerable. And so we've been working with Sue and other residents to try to figure out, if we did get these units, and we're looking right now at 8 units, and this would not have happened if it wasn't for this program. And we're saying, if we did get these 8 units, what kind of mix would we have between our staff, who from all income levels, our nurses, our food providers, our facilities person, when the power goes out, keeping the generators going and these are day-to-day concerns we're faced with. Evacuation and emergency medical technicians. You know, we've got 300 plus people living on that campus. So we look at this as part of our solution to serving our residents and our staff. And when we say, okay, how many folks could we have living there? But what about first responders? What about EMTs? What about firefighters? So those are critical to having a mix of people living in those 8 units, if we could do that. What we're faced with as we're evaluating this is I'm hearing this whole conversation tonight, the setbacks, the zoning doesn't work for us at all. If it wasn't for this program, we would not have been able to even explore this. It's just not even an opportunity. And so this opened up the conversation for us to work with the town, and the town has been fantastic. The geological studies, we've been working with the town geologist. We're still in the midst of that. We hope to get that wrapped up by the end of this quarter to really understand where can we develop and where can we not develop. Unfortunately, the Sequoia campus has a fault line running right through it. And that was an eye opener for all of us. We're still unraveling that. We've identified places where we can develop, places where we can't develop. And then you try to reconcile, all right, the setback from here and the road here and the fault line here. And suddenly you have no place to develop except, oh, right here or maybe over here. And we need as much cooperation from the town as possible. This is not going to be a tax credit deal. It's not going to be an HCD deal. These are going to be 8 units that we're going to have to figure out how to finance this in a partnership with the town. And it's only going to be if we can get land use approvals to develop on this site. But we are optimistic. We could get 8 units and it could be part of a big solution to whether it's, I mean, imagine the pandemic. We never even imagined. So we have to shut down our dining facilities and now start to deliver food individually to each apartment. And you're no longer having a kitchen or buffet that's serving hundreds of people at a time. You've now got to get this out the door to everybody on a 42-acre campus. It was overwhelming, but we did it as a community. And when that next crisis happens, we need that same type of flexibility, creativity, and we're looking for that with the town. So I just appreciate everybody's commitment to this. We really think that this is a great tool, and we love, like Sue said, yes, yes, yes. We love to work. And we've already invested heavily in this, and we're committed to investing even more. So thank you very much.
Great, Dave, thank you so much for participating and sharing all this. It's really helpful for us to hear from a potential new affiliate partner, I guess, that's looking seriously at adding housing.
Thank you.
That's super helpful. Okay, we've got a few more questions from public. Dudley Carlson. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is a fascinating conversation, and looking at that list of 3 questions and listening to your comments, the thing I kept thinking about was the town as a participant in this part of the process, and the broader question that we raise money every year to buy or to potentially buy open space because we value it. Why couldn't we raise money the same way to buy land for the town to own, but for a developer to put housing on and let it be a mix of high, low, and medium density of value housing? Something that would allow the town, the way Stanford allows faculty to buy a house, but the land under it belongs to Stanford, and that house must then be sold back or sold to another Stanford associate. That's the complexity part that you folks have to wrestle with, and there's not time for that here. But the concept of the community, those who value the need for housing, ponying up to help raise money so that the town could buy land for housing where it is most appropriate, where it can be evacuated, where it is fire safe, where it meets all the other criteria you're discussing. Thanks. That's just a thought.
Thanks, Dudley. It's an interesting idea. I mean, the town does have some money to put towards housing, right? So it's an interesting idea. Okay, Ellen Vernazza, you're next up.
I have a question, and I was just gonna say, who would be responsible should low-income houses be sold in town? Who is going to be policing in the future the resales and make sure that they would continue to be under a certain program of low-income housing?
Laura, do you want to address that?
Yeah, generally speaking, there's a deed restriction that's recorded for the property that sets out the terms of how long it has to be affordable and who it has to be affordable to. And then the larger cities that already have a program like this typically contract with specialists that know how to monitor the units and make sure they're either re-rented or resold to rent it to residents that meet the qualifications. So there's excellent examples in other communities that we would draw from when we get to that point.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, Tim Clark, you're next.
Yes, my name's Tim Clark and I'm from Ladera Community Church. And we are a member of the Affiliated Housing Program. Councilman Alf may recall that when we applied back in 2019, we said this program is not suitable for what we want to do, which is to build affordable housing. But we wanted to put a stake in the ground and say that's what we're interested in. So that is a certain amount of symbolism. The reason that the program does not work for us is that we have a half an acre that is within the boundaries of Portola Valley, and we have the equivalent 3 full-time equivalents. So there's no option really to use this property to house our own employees. So we're interested in something that would be broader. And I think one of the things that people have suggested is that I would love to have a set of rules for the affiliated housing program, and we could look at those, and also to have a zoning set up for multifamily housing. We could look at that and see what would work the best in our particular rather tiny place. I mean, we're only going to have, I doubt if we'll have as many as 9 units on our space. So there's some considerations around that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim. So I'm not totally clear on why the affiliate housing program doesn't work for you, Tim. Can you just be a little more specific?
We don't have employees who could live on that land. If we put housing there, we don't have employees to fill it up.
I see what you're saying.
As currently defined, it would be limited to people who work for Ladera Church, and they don't have that many employees. Yes.
Okay. So that's a perfect example of where broadening that definition would be helpful. Okay, that's good. Thank you. All right, that's great. Ray, and I don't know how to pronounce your last name. I'm so sorry.
I just found out Bodawin. You came close.
Bodawin.
It's a difficult one. We changed it to make it easier, but it's still hard. First, I want to say,
it says Sequoia Living next to your name here. Do you want to? What's your connection?
I am the Vice President of Facilities and Procurement for Sequoia Living, and I work with Dave Latina as well. So
Great, thank you.
We both are on many different projects together. So
Great.
Thanks, first of all, to Sue Crane for making sure we're on this call in this very important program. Dave has shared most of the comments that I was going to mention, which I'm very grateful for. But one of the things that I did want to mention, Sequoia Living has raised concern, and these are comments that really coincide with Bill Kelly's comments as well as other committee members about having workforce housing on the site that they are working for. So we would be open to more firefighters, paramedics, maybe even San Mateo County, paramedic program or sheriff's department, other things to be open for that. But I also have to back up Dave's comments in regards to the setbacks. We would have to have a lot of latitude on that based on some of our seismic and geotechnical reports thus far, which we're hoping to get. But I really do appreciate this committee. It's very important, not only for your town, but for many others in the county, in the Bay Area. So thank you very much for your work and your dedication.
Thank you, Ray. Thanks for participating. I'm so curious. Do you have like an estimate of how many units you could or would build if you had more flexibility?
I think Dave has more information on that. I know that we have something. I don't know if we could share it at this time because sometimes we get held to a hard number.
Yeah.
It's just like we don't want to talk about budgets either. We also have to see if this pencils out on both sides.
Yeah.
So that's something that we will, we are going to get it. We are hopeful that by the end of this first quarter, that we're
Okay.
going to have that information.
Yeah, it's a pretty major endeavor. I understand. So it would be more than the 8 units that Dave mentioned if there was more flexibility. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay.
Thank you for having us.
Super. Thank you. Karen Askey, I think you're the last one, and then we're going to move on to SB 9 update. Karen? Nope. Okay.
Hi, thanks.
There you go.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the discussion. I think that there's been a lot of really good points made, and I just want to support the fact that this committee has to be as creative as possible in finding homes for 253 people. And so looking at affiliate housing as, you know, one of the many elements in the toolkit, I think is very important, and being flexible, as we've heard, if the Sequoias can bring more on and we can figure out how to do it. I also keep thinking back, I support Sarah's comment as really truly understanding which employees that work in town want to live in town, because I do know some teachers that really don't want to run into their students' parents at Roberts or around town because they want to get away from their workplace and get somewhere else. But I also think of Ron Ramey's. I think he was trying to figure out how to house his employees. I know Alpine Hills staff, some of those people are commuting to Tracy. We have the Alpine Inn. We have a lot of folks in the community that we haven't talked about that support this community. And, you know, I don't think Alpine Hills can be an affiliate member or have enough land, but I would like to kind of open it up and get more creative on how we can look at those areas of opportunity. And then my last question, and this doesn't need to get answered now, is that there was a comment that 3 units could be built in that area next to town center. But again, I wonder, could we build more there? Maybe they need to be smaller, but can we be creative in how we look at it? Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Okay. Okay, we got a couple more questions here that have popped up. We've got now 24 attendees, just so you know, from the community. Christy Corley, your hand's up, and then Karen after you. And we're gonna then wrap up this section.
Thank you. I just had a few ideas. I know with our bonus density law, we often we get requests for concessions from developers to make it work for them. And I do think that the town, to keep in mind, what can the town ask in return? So if there's a park in the middle, can our families use that park? Such as Ladera's pool. I used to take my kids up there and it was open to me and I was thankful. Developers ask for a lot of concessions. Please ask for concessions in return, especially if you're going to change zoning. And when Mr. Targ talked about floating zoning, I'd like that defined for the regular public. I don't know what he means by that. And I still think that we could use an overall plan for the whole town of what we envision. And I would love to see more of that, the whole town drawn out. How do we envision it? What are we working towards? Instead of, oh, this developer came, let's do that in this corner. Oh, this developer just get an application, let's do it in that corner. I just feel like we need a big plan to do it right. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicholas, are you still on? Okay. Next one, Karen. I don't have your last name, sorry.
Hi, this is Karen Batra. I just wanted to make a comment about the idea of preferring or having a preference. It just doesn't feel right to me to have a preference for somebody that just happens to, at the moment, be a specific class of person in terms of their employment status or exactly where they work, you know, preferring a firefighter that happens to work in Portola Valley versus one that works in Woodside or Palo Alto, or, you know, a nurse versus somebody that is a cleaning person. It just doesn't, to me, feel correct. So that's just my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so Laura, I guess, have you gotten enough feedback? We haven't heard from everybody on the committee. Do you want to ask if there's any more input to the questions, or do you have kind of enough to go on now? Yeah, Jeff, you're raising your hand.
I'll let Laura answer that, but I wanted to respond to a couple of things that came up just quickly.
Sure.
But after Laura, if you want to
All right,
answer
let
that
me
for a
just have
second.
Laura answer that, and then we'll go back to you, Jeff. Okay.
Well, I think this has been very helpful. I mean, I think it's been very good discussion. We'll have to go back and kind of put some of these pieces together. So I think the major consensus point that I'm getting in terms of how we're moving forward, I think I'm hearing that the committee seems to be overall favoring keeping the program in some form, but not over relying on the program as a major source of units, just another one of the tools in the toolkit. So then we would go back and think about how we might structure it to kind of meet some of the things that you were interested in talking about and learning about. So then I think we'd have to talk about it at a future meeting, some of the details, but it sounds like we'll have that conversation as a program of the housing element, and the number of housing units that we might count is going to be pretty low in terms of trying to meet our 253 units. So I think we would go back to some of the partners, in particular who we heard from, Tim Clark from Ladera and the team from Sequoias, and see if any of those numbers are firm enough to include. And if they are firm enough to include, perhaps do that, but otherwise I don't think we'd be able to fill in any numbers. But that's fine, because I think we have really interesting feedback to start to develop program language. And then we would go back and think about the zoning options that Nicholas Targ was asking about, and make sure we've got the right tools to address the things that we want to address. So that's kind of a long way around, but.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
I would say also, that was a good summary, but also zoning considerations for, in particular, Ladera and Sequoias, to provide the flexibility they need to actually participate fully in the way that they would want to. It'd be that too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a helpful feedback tonight.
Yeah. Okay. Jeff, we'll go to you.
Thanks. A few questions came up during the public comment. I just thought I'd respond to one of them quickly. Dudley, I think, mentioned the idea of using town funds or public funds to buy land. So we have public funds. We have an inclusionary housing fund. Most of the money in that fund comes from basically funds paid by subdivisions. We talked about that previously, but we do have about just under $4 million. In fact, we discussed giving some of that. We're formulating a policy on how we can spend that money. We do have some public money. The open space fund that you mentioned is funded primarily by utility users tax. We could enact a new tax and direct it towards affordable housing. We would need a popular vote on that. So something to explore, I suppose. And then the open space is also funded partially by donations. We could send up a fund to see if people want to donate for affordable housing. That's a fine idea. I will point out that in 2012, the council did attempt to use the Inclusionary Housing Fund to purchase 900 Portola Road for the purpose of affordable housing, and the public reaction was mixed. It's like I said, it's an interesting idea. Not everyone is going to agree with it when it's actually put into practice. It's just something to consider. Tim Clark's point about non-employees living at Ladera is a really great example of something where I think maybe the relevance of the program or the application of the affiliated housing program has changed since we last reviewed it. And I think it's really a very relevant point to review to reopen that discussion. Talking about emergency workers living in town, I agree it'd be great to have more first responders living in town. The last time we talked about this, my understanding was that actually a lot of our emergency workers, including firefighters, actually don't qualify for below market rate housing because their incomes are too high. I'd love to find a way to sort of to around that. But in terms of, we talk about sort of, I mean, maybe there's market rate housing out there for them, but we talked about below market rate housing for first responders, and in some cases they actually made too much money. That's just the hangups of the bureaucracy of the program. When somebody, you know, we really, I mean, in terms of developers coming into town and asking for concessions, you know, in the off chance, if the Stanford project is approved, it would, subject to the approval, would be part of something called a development agreement, where we would actually be looking for things in return from them. And that's something that gets negotiated kind of separately from the approval. But your point about we should be getting things in return if we're going to approve large projects is completely on point, well taken. And the last point I'll make is that we're talking about affiliated housing and affordable housing for people who live on our institutions and who are property owners, but a lot of people come into town and work in or on privately held property. I mean, a lot of what we're doing, you know, when we talk about preferences, it's sort of, it's extending this idea of affiliated housing for people who work at specific sites in town, and thinking about, do we do something to specifically extend housing to people who live and work on private properties in town, or maybe are just doing a lot of work here, you know, construction workers, gardeners, you know, home care workers. So it's just another question that I think we need to address. Those are the points I wanted to bring up. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Sarah Warnikoff.
Those were all really awesome points. I'll just add real quick on the in lieu fund, just so people have a sense that it's not like an enormous amount of money. I think it's about $4 million right now. So if you think about the cost of land, the cost of building, you know, it's something, but it's not going to go that far before people start thinking we have this pot of gold, unfortunately. And then also just a reminder, and I'm sure Laura and team will give us updates on it. This committee has actually been charged with helping to come up with the policy as to how that funding is going to be spent. So Laura, I don't know at what point we'll be doing that, but just a heads up to keep everybody apprised of that.
Thanks, Sarah. Something I wanted to bring up as we wrapping this section up. Christy Corley shared with us, with me, and then I shared it with Sarah and Jeff and town staff, this survey that Mill Valley did. And it was a survey they sent out to residents asking them for input about their housing element. And it's something that we're want to consider, and I just wanted to put it out to you. And I kind of wanted to just do a show of hands from the committee to see if this is something that you think would be worthwhile to explore further and undertake. And, you know, Sarah, you can jump in because you actually took the survey. I kind of flipped through it, but it, you know, we could ask about density and what people's preferences are on density issues. Or even some of these questions that we're thinking about with affiliate housing. Sarah, do you have any more you want to add? Unmute.
Sorry. It was actually a super simple survey. It was 14 questions. I'd say about maybe 6 or 7 questions were more like demographic questions, I'm sure, so they could splice and dice the data. But then it asked things like, you know, to Jocelyn's point, you know, do you want it clustered? Do you want it spread out? A whole host of different things that I think actually we can even pick up, you know, some of their questions that could be applied to our town and just keep it really simple. So I thought it was an interesting idea. So yeah, that's about it. It took me less than 10 minutes to take it.
And it was like done on SurveyMonkey, so it's easy to put together and send out and tabulate. So I guess maybe we could use our little electronic hands. Can you raise your electronic hand if you are in favor of doing this sort of SurveyMonkey survey with people in town around issues that we're looking at? Okay, so I see 2, 4, 6, 8 hands up. I'm assuming the others are not interested. Okay, so 8 hands up. Okay, thanks, that's helpful. Yeah, Janie? Oh, you had your hand up. Okay, so 9 hands up. Anybody whose electronic hand didn't go up, who's in favor of doing a survey like this? That's your actual hand.
I'm just abstaining.
Oh.
I think there's potential good use
Yeah.
of it, and I have
Okay.
some concerns how it could be used, so I'm abstaining.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think
Yeah.
it depends on the timing of it, how the questions are formatted. We're underway right now, whether something concrete is proposed, whether it's just an as who doesn't want another survey or more input from the public, but it just needs to say, before I can raise my hand, I think we need, maybe like everything else for me, we should think it through and what we're planning up for.
Okay. All right. So offline, I'll talk through this some more and then decide what our next step might be. Thank you.
Hey, Jocelyn,
Sue,
I raised my hand, but I really would want to know, are those the exact questions we would want to ask our constituents, or would we want to change the questions? To fit this committee's choice of information that we want, that would be very important to me.
Great question. I think the idea is to not adopt their survey, but to use that as a model and then come up with questions specific to Portola Valley and our process. Yeah, thank you for asking that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So we'll table that for now. Thank you. All right. Next on the agenda, we've got the SB9 update, and that's also for committee discussion. People can lower your electronic hands now. Thank you. And we're going to take it. Laura, are you up, or Adrian?
It's me.
You. All right. Go for it.
Okay, does that look okay to everyone?
Yes.
Okay, so we don't need to spend a ton of time on this, but there's been a lot of questions from the public, and I wanted to make sure, we want to make sure that this committee understands the basics of the SB9 ordinance that council adopted. And Cara is available to answer questions, and she can chime in on that question from earlier about the mountain lion issue that came up. So this is going over the ordinance that was approved by council on December 8th. Just a second. Okay, so as we've talked about, there's this giant web of housing laws. They keep changing. They're very complex, hard to understand. There's different interpretations. So especially with SB9, we do expect the interpretations to continue to change and for this to evolve. And we're seeing other communities adopt different things. But the council really felt like it was very important for us to adopt something, because the implications were very severe in terms of losing discretionary review authority over certain projects. So it was important to act quickly to maintain as much local control as possible. But we do think some of this is going to evolve and change as we go. So the quick summary of SB9 is that it requires ministerial approval of two major things. The first one is urban lot splits. So that's one-time subdivision of an existing single-family residential parcel. So it's only one time. You can't do it multiple times. No serial lot splits. It's only into two parcels. They need to be approximately the same size, and that's defined in the law and now in our code. And then the second portion of this is related to allowing 2-unit housing developments on single-family residential parcels. So I'll go into a little bit more detail about what that means in a minute. So in terms of implementation of this, what we did is council conducted a meeting on October 13th and appointed a subcommittee of at that time, the mayor and the vice mayor. Council directed staff to draft an ordinance to keep as much local control as we could, consider fire and geologic safety, and comply with the law. So the subcommittee and the staff developed an ordinance in consultation with the fire marshal. It was approved on December 8th, and it is currently in effect. We've had in the order of magnitude of about 5 inquiries have come through our planning and building team None of them are really serious yet about applying. We can't tell, but just kind of gives you a sense of the kind of the level of interest we've seen. So in terms of our approach to the ordinance, what we did is we took all of the requirements of the state law. So there's location restrictions, put those into the local ordinance. We created a prohibition of SB9 units in geologically unsafe areas. So we're using our existing geologic safety resolution and maps and applying that here. And then we've talked about it, and there's what we're calling the restricted area based on evacuation access that was defined for ADUs. The Planning Commission worked a lot on that initiative. So we took that same concept and applied it to SB9 units. We also wrote in that if there's any new safety policies that are developed with the safety element, which we do expect, then those would automatically apply. The adjusted maximum floor area, AMFA, what we call it, for new parcels would be calculated according to the zoning ordinance. But the state law always requires us to allow 800 square foot units, those two 800 square foot units. So there's a little carve out for that. We also created objective standards to regulate the building's envelope, design, and appearance, and added fire safety requirements there too. And then the Planning Commission had done a lot of work for ADUs to create incentives and disincentives to encourage compliance with our local setbacks instead of using the state law setbacks that allow you to go down as low as 4 feet. So all of those things that the Commission created previously for ADUs, we carried forward into the SB9 ordinance. As written, the ordinance also allows current projects that do not fall under the state law to go through our normal process. Or if you're proposing SB9 units that would be greater than the square footage that's allowed by our code, then you could go through a normal discretionary review process through CC. So here are the size units that was decided on. This aligns with our ADU ordinance. So up on top, if you comply with the state setbacks, so that's less than our zoning code and down to 4 feet, a 1-bedroom SB9 unit can be 850 square feet, and more than 1 bedroom, it can be 1,000 square feet. If you do comply with our local setbacks, it applies to your base zoning district that would normally apply. Then you can have a 1,200 square foot ADU in general, and then the larger lots of 3.5 acres or more, you can have 1,500 square feet. So we've been talking about objective standards. This goes back to the discussion that Judy Murphy brought up earlier about checklists and how do we apply these things to regulate development when we no longer have discretionary development. So SB9 residential units would not be reviewed by ASCC. So to address those design issues, that mechanism is objective standards. So what we did is we took elements of the design guidelines and existing policies and common issues that are addressed by ASCC, and we created a checklist. And that checklist was adopted by council resolution with the ordinance and can be amended from time to time as it's needed. Also, we have an existing ADU fire safety checklist. And so that was developed by staff in the fire marshal for ADUs. And we took that same checklist and applied it to SB9 units for those units that don't comply with our local setbacks. So I like a diagram, and it's been hard for people to visualize this. So this is in very simple terms. If you have an urban lot split with a 2-unit housing development, you have on the left, you have an existing house and an ADU on a biggish property. Okay, and that under this law, you're allowed to split that into 2 approximately same size units. And then on each of those new lots, you can have 2 new units. So a total of 4 units where there used to be a main house and an ADU. The only caveat to this is there could be JADUs, junior accessory dwelling units, that could be added onto these depending on what the circumstances are and how you cut everything up. There's always nuance, as we always talk about in these things, but I think in the simplest terms, the way to understand this is a lot that used to be allowed to have one house and one ADU, can be divided in two, and 4 units can be built on those 2 lots. You can't then divide it again, and you can't keep adding ADUs to get to higher number of units. And then this is a case where there's a 2-unit housing development where there's not a lot split. So this is an example where the lot size is less than 3.5 acres, which is meaningful in our code. So you have, in both cases, you have a primary house that's limited by the AMFA, that's for that zoning district and that specific lot. And it may include a 500 square foot junior accessory dwelling unit within that main house. On the left is the existing configuration where you can also have an ADU. And if it's a new detached ADU, that can be up to 800 square feet under state law, and that can exceed AMFA. And then on the right-hand side is on the SB9 scenario. So you can have the primary house with the JADU inside. You can have that same ADU if it's new and detached, and it can exceed AMFA by 800 square feet. Then the new part of this is you can also have an SB9 unit. And if it can be new, detached, or attached, and it can also exceed AMFA by 800 square feet. So that last unit on the bottom is really the new part by this most recent law in the new ordinance. So what does this mean for this committee's work and the RHNA allocation? So this is still very much an open topic. So this is the latest information that we have, but we suspect it's going to continue to evolve. So we're working with 21 Elements and the other small towns in the county. 21 Elements has been in contact with HCD, Housing and Community Development, to get some input and interpretation on this. Their initial response at HCD was we were not going to be able to count SB9 units at all in terms of meeting our RHNA because there's not evidence or knowledge of what the market is going to do to respond to this. So we asked them to think about this further and see if we could do any additional analysis or modeling that might show that we could have some SB9 units so that we could count those. So what we're finding right now is we don't expect that there's going to be what we call a safe harbor like there is for ADUs. You'll recall that big long discussion we had about ADUs and how we count them and what the assumptions are. So we don't think there's going to be that same kind of structure around SB9 units. We think if we're going to count them, we're going to need to provide a justification like modeling and think about what the expected unit production is going to be. And again, that's because we don't have evidence or knowledge of the market response. So that initial feedback we've gotten is they will likely count as market rate, that there wouldn't be a way to count them as affordable units, like we have a formula for ADUs. So as this continues to evolve, staff will update the committee as those best practices come out and we hear more from HCD and 21 Elements. So that concludes my overview presentation. Happy to try to answer any questions. I also want to turn it over for a minute to Cara, who is going to speak to the earlier question about the mountain lion question.
Thanks. So the question was that whether the Woodside or town of Woodside's ordinance that was modified to account for a mountain lion exception could be something that the town could take a look at. And we are aware of that issue. Just to unpack the issue a little bit, SB9 incorporates all of the location exceptions that are codified in another piece of legislation known as SB 35. SB 35 is a very significant piece of housing legislation and is used in many larger cities that do not comply with their housing elements as a mechanism for providing by right housing. So under SB 35, there is an exemption for habitat for candidate species that are designated by the Fish and Game Commission of California. In April 2020, the Fish and Game Commission did designate the mountain lion as a candidate species. Under this designation procedure, the commission typically takes about a year to investigate whether the candidate should be in fact declared an endangered species. A year has passed and there has not been a ruling on this request yet, but hopefully there will be a resolution shortly. The area that was designated as the habitat for the mountain lion was contained in a map that was submitted by the environmental group that submitted the application for the candidate designation. And the map is it's a very broad swath of land. It goes from essentially San Francisco on the north to the border on the south, and then the 5 freeway essentially on the east to the coast on the west. So it's a very broad swath of land. And so the implications of this exception is that essentially SB 9 would not be a viable tool for most development in California. And also it would also defeat the use of SB 35 as well, which, as I mentioned, is a pretty significant housing tool that has been used to require the approval of by right housing in many primarily urban cities. So if we're still not sure about the interpretation of this candidate species, the language in SB 35 doesn't really talk about how the location restriction is to be interpreted. It certainly mountain lion qualifies as a candidate species, but we're not sure about how a habitat is determined if the species has not yet been determined to be an actual endangered species. So from a practical standpoint, we still need to look into that issue. If the issue is determined to essentially nullify SB 35 and SB 9, I think we can expect legislative amendment at the state level. But there may be a small window of time where Portola Valley could amend its ordinance to exempt more clearly properties that do fall under this designation, which would essentially probably be the entire town. But again, we're looking into that issue, and we don't expect that it would be a permanent solution going forward.
Thank you.
So with that, happy to answer questions.
Yeah, it's helpful. Okay, Helen, do you have something?
I have a quick question. Under the coastal zone and under the Coastal Act, there's the environmentally sensitive, the ESHA environmentally sensitive habitat area. Is there anything like that other than under the areas under the Coastal Act?
Are there any coastal areas in Portola Valley?
No. I know that this is not the coastal zone.
Okay.
I am
Yes.
asking about the habitat designations other than habitat. I know of habitat designations under the Coastal Act. So are there other habitat designations and other, environmentally sensitive habitat? Like I know, for instance, along there are like under ABAG that there are environmentally sensitive designations, for instance. So like
Yeah, I think maybe what you're asking, are there other exceptions to SB 9? And there's a whole series of exceptions to SB 9 that relate to coastal areas and environmentally sensitive areas, to conservation areas. And all of those requirements have been carried forward into our ordinance, and they would all apply.
Right. Land within 100-year floodplain or floodway, et cetera, et
Yes.
cetera. I've got it open. So that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking under ABAG, there are environmentally sensitive habitats that are recognized. And I'm trying to get clarity on what we have in Portola Valley. If by any chance we have any knowledge around that.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, that'd be
those are.
great to figure out. Thank you.
Okay, Bob, go ahead.
Thanks. I had a couple questions. In the petition that was granted by the Department of Fish and Wildlife, they defined the critical habitat for the candidate species as you described, and Portola Valley is contained entirely within that. Doesn't by virtue of the fact that the petition was granted by the department, doesn't that not only designate mountain lions a candidate species, but also designate the habitat as specified in the petition as a critical habitat?
I don't think that it does for purposes of SB 9 because of the wording of SB 9. Unless it would be that there could be another exception in SB 9 for, critical habitat or something like that, that arguably could apply. But under the exception that we've been looking at, the wildlife exception, the species exception, it only talks about the particular species, the candidate species.
SB 9 itself doesn't talk about the habitat.
SB 35, right.
Right, referenced by SB 9. In terms of the definition of what that critical habitat is, it seems like it would necessarily be, what was in the petition that was granted by the department. What other source would there be to define the critical habitat? That's my question. But I understand what you're saying. And then the other question I have, I don't know if you're aware, but the planning director in Woodside issued a memo last week saying that Woodside would not be accepting SB 9 proposals because all of Woodside falls within the area specified as a critical habitat, and because the language of the law excludes the critical habitat. So Woodside at least is excluding the entire town for now, because of that reason. And this is a big issue, and in Woodside's view anyway, to process an SB 9 application would be a violation of the law by their reasoning. And I'm wondering if you're planning to give sort of a formal written legal opinion about this, because it really does seem critical. It seems that we have the potential to be violating state law if we end up on the wrong side of this.
Yes, I agree. And as I mentioned, we are researching the issue. I think there are some additional regulations that talk about the habitat itself. There's certainly a difference between, a mountainous area that is not developed. I think somebody.
I know, I'm trying to find my.
Thank you. So I think there's a difference between, an undeveloped mountainous area versus an urbanized infill area where you wouldn't expect to see the mountain lion. And the map that was part of the petition includes everything without regard to whether there are buildings or not. And I do believe that there are some regulations that talk about which particular parcels within that general area should be excluded and which are developable. But that's exactly what we're researching.
Thank you.
Great. And then just any other questions for Laura on SB 9 too? Go ahead, Sarah. You got to unmute, please.
Do you guys wouldn't remind, so the mountain lion ordinance relates to SB 35 and the SB 35 is embedded more or less in SB 9, correct? Can you just explain the correlation there, or the relationship between SB 9 and SB 35 again? I'm still confused about that.
Sure. So SB 9 is, as we mentioned, a very complicated law, and it has a series of exceptions. And it has about, I don't know, 20 exceptions that it doesn't apply to. And so we've discussed one of those exceptions being the very high fire hazard area. But with respect to that exception, then there is an exception to the use of that exception. And so the exception to very high fire hazard areas, for instance, is if you apply Chapter 7A of the building code, then that exception doesn't apply. And so there are, 20 or so of these exceptions. One of the exceptions references a whole series of exceptions that are contained in SB 35. And one of the exceptions in SB 35 relates to habitat for candidate species. And if there is, so parcels that are located on land that is designated as habitat for candidate species or endangered species would be exempt from SB 9. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Okay. That's super helpful. Kara, Laura, great presentation. Any other questions from our committee for Laura or Kara?
Yeah, it's just Nicholas. If you think that you understand the answer to the question that was asked, you aren't paying enough attention to it. It's super complicated, and we're going to understand what the answer is over the fullness of time as it's litigated. And there's a whole bunch of exceptions in language in SB 35 that hasn't been litigated at this point in time, and it will be. Some of them are much broader than pertains to candidate endangered species. And the fact of the matter is, it's an issue of how aggressive people are and where the courts are going to end up. And respectfully and respecting the posture, of course, of the town attorney and of the council.
Thank you.
I guess I would, I would feel more comfortable if we had sort of a formal legal opinion from our town attorney, because as I read through it, I'm not a lawyer, but it seems it doesn't seem ambiguous to me. Let me put it that way. Again, no legal background here, but but this is our next door neighbors are interpreting it in a different way. And so it seems like it'd be reasonable to have, a formal opinion that we could fall back on. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right. All right, Laura, that was great. I guess we're going to just now go to the public. We have now 18 attendees, it looks like, from our community, and Christy Corley and then Rusty Day have hands up. Go ahead, Christy.
Yeah, thank you. It's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that our council can write anything they want to into the ordinances that would be specific for our area in which we have a very unique environment, even when HCD came out here and looked, they saw the high fire. So when we go from one house on a lot, if it has one house, and we now can build 8 houses, and we can exterminate mountain lion and affect our evacuation roads and getting out alive if there's a fire, I would hope that our town council would write in what they need to write in to protect endangered species as well as the lives of the residents. So a male mountain lion has a radius of 250 kilometers and a female has a radius of 100. And I believe in Redwood City or somewhere close, 2 males just fought it out and won. So there's a lot of interbreeding that happens when you decrease their habitat as well, and then they die off. So I'm saying that in general. I'm not a biologist. I'm an exercise physiology, so don't quote me exactly. And then I did have a few more questions about SB 9 and what we're going to do about basements and rooftop, where you can go on the rooftop. So bunkers and basements and rooftops is also something that we may want to discuss if people are going to be 4 feet back and side with their ADUs. Thank you.
Any comments, Laura or Kara, on that?
I would say broadly speaking, the council has some discretion in what they write in the ordinance, but it's still quite limited. So I wouldn't say they can write whatever they want. In regards to safety considerations, it has to be based on evidence. So that's one of the reasons that our safety element update process is so important, so that we can have more data and more evidence if the council wishes to be address these things in a more fine-grained way in the future. One house under SB 9 couldn't be developed into 8 houses. It could only be developed into 4. Your point about endangered species is well taken. Certainly the town attorney's office will be following up for the discussion we just had. And in regards to basements and rooftops, if the project doesn't comply with our base zoning district setbacks, then they are not allowed to have basements or rooftop decks in the version that was approved by council.
Great summary. Thank you. Rusty Day, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I would like to echo the request for an opinion by town council as to whether the town must comply with the written findings and order of the Department of Fish and Wildlife designating the environmentally significant unit of mountain lion in the Central and Southern California districts. In advance of reaching its findings in April, the commission had a staff report prepared that went through the petition very carefully and confirmed that the territory identified in the petition was the habitat that posed significant concern for the mountain lion and needed to be protected. And on that basis, the commission issued its written findings on April 21st. I'm sure that the town councils read the written findings from the commission, but here's what they say. Pursuant to the Fish and Game Code, the commission determined that the amount of information contained in the petition, when considered in light of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's written evaluation report, the comments received and the remainder of the administrative record would lead a reasonable person to conclude there's substantial possibility the requested listing for all of the territories identified would occur. Based on that finding and the acceptance of the petition, the commission is also providing notice that the Southern California Central Coast ESU, that is Evolutionary Significant Unit, of mountain lions is a candidate species as defined by section 2068 of the Fish and Game Code. And it's precisely because the mountain lion is endangered within that territory that the entire territory was designated. So I hope the town council will review the written opinion of the commission and make sure that the town is in compliance with state law and not proceeding with any SB 9 applications until the commission reaches a final decision on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Rusty. Okay. Well, thank you, Laura, Kara, again for your help in clarifying so much information for us. Appreciate your expertise and knowledge. It's amazing. And I'm looking at the agenda. Our next thing is a staff update. Got 5 minutes allocated. And Laura, you're going to talk about forthcoming committee meeting topics and schedule. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
So we just like to do this little preview so that people know what's coming up. So very important meeting scheduled for February 22nd. I keep double checking that date because the 21st is a holiday. So that's one of the meetings that we moved to a Tuesday. So that meeting is going to be about our sites inventory. So this is going to be bringing a bunch of pieces together and having discussion about the actual sites that we want to designate for multifamily housing or other considerations. So on our timeline, it's really important that this step start to happen now and these kind of pieces come together. So in preparation for that meeting, we have requested some written follow-up from Zeke Lender that I think I mentioned earlier. We continue to coordinate with the fire marshal to bring some of that information to you. We've got some maps prepared by our planning consultant that we're going to show you that will kind of layer together. Then we're going to go back and revisit the strategies that we talked about before to get units. So you remember in October, I'm pretty sure we reviewed those different strategies and talked about what sites may be. So it was very conceptual at that time. So now we want to bring these pieces together and have a detailed conversation about this. So this is a really important topic. So if everyone could be mindful of that, we'll get information out to you in advance that you'll be able to read and the public will be able to read. And we expect to have a really fulsome discussion of that at that time. Based on the level of work that's going to be required for that, and I hesitate and I'm sorry, we're probably going to have to reach out to the committee and have another immediate meeting, sort of back-to-back meetings on that topic in order to stay on the schedule and keep our momentum going. So if everyone would please keep your eyes open for a scheduling tool that will come from our team as we're, or some proposed dates or confirmation emails, something like that that we'll get out to you. Please get back to us so we can see about scheduling another meeting immediately following that. We're in terms of our overall schedule, we're really at the most intensive part of this committee's work. So we really want to thank you for the incredible amount of time that you're putting into these really key meetings here. This is a lot of the meat of this process. So we're working very intensely behind the scenes to bring things together for you to have this discussion about sites. Once we're done with that site inventory work, that allows some of the things that are happening kind of behind the scenes related to the environmental review to allow that to get started. And then once we've done some of the technical work, then we'll bring that forward and update the public on what the schedule of that is going to be. So more information on that will be forthcoming. And then after we've done that, we'll come back to some of these policies and programs. And over the month or so after that, we'll be thinking about these different policy program pieces and a lot of ideas that you've had and trying to bring those together. We've also got work going on to compile some best practices from Paradise and other places that have implemented fire safety as an integral part of their document. So we're collecting those things to bring forward to the committee for consideration. And then we'll start to move on to kind of implementation steps around zoning, and how do we actually take these ideas and bring them together. So as mentioned, the Committee on Committees will continue to work and will feed in that information in a similar way that we did today. That seemed very successful from my point of view in terms of bringing it in. So we'll build on that from last time so that this committee continues to have the feedback of the Committee of Committees. And then there'll also be another community-wide meeting that will be upcoming probably in the middle of March to the end of March. So we're working on the scheduling for that. And we'll bring that feedback back into this committee as well. So wanted to give you a preview of a little bit of what's happening, and happy to answer any questions to the degree that I can. As you know, there's a lot of moving parts, and we're just trying to get everything lined up and get you good information. So any questions that I can answer?
I just wanted to do a shout out about that meeting on the 22nd. I'm thinking that it's falling in ski week for a lot of the school districts. But I do think it's a really important meeting. So hopefully we can get good participation at that meeting.
In that regard, Zoom will help.
Yeah.
I will be joining from Kirkwood.
Great. All right, that was helpful. I feel like we're
Chair
building this-
Swisher, just
Yes.
before, if we're moving on to minutes,
Yes.
I just wanted to go back in response to the question about open space, if I may. Jeremy actually forwarded a document to me, which is available on our website. And it's an actual listing of our open spaces. It's complicated because some of them it includes the ones owned by Mid-Penn Regional Open Space Trust. It also includes ones like, for example, like Coal Mine Ridge is open space, but it's owned by Portola Valley Ranch. So it includes easements. I can't easily, there's no chat box, so I can't share the link directly, but you can see up here, there is, we'll try to maybe publish it. We'll try to send it out to people if they're interested. I just wanted to let people know we do actually, it's not a simple thing to add up all the acres of open space and to classify them by what we own, what's an easement, and what's been given to another authority. But we'd actually could make a decent guess at how much we have, or you can see what's out there, put it that way.
But
Thanks.
it does look like it indicates acquired by the town. Yeah, so it has that.
Yes.
Yeah.
It delineates all those things. I'm just saying it, but to figure out what we actually
Add up-
own, you kind of got
add
to
up
take some time with
something.
this one. So
Thanks for sharing that, Jeff. And Jeremy, thanks for forwarding.
yes, thank you to Jeremy for digging that one up. It's on the website. We'll try to figure out how to get it out to people as well.
Great, thanks. Okay, Laura, you're doing an incredible job just orchestrating this whole very complicated process. I really want to thank you and your team. It's like building this 100-layer cake. You'd want to.
I wish it was a cake. I love cake, but I
That would
really,
be awesome.
I really appreciate that feedback. It's a lot of stuff going on to try to get good information in front of the committee. So just thank you for this robust discussion that you always have and for receiving it so well. It makes the whole process work. When my team does our part and you do your part, it's really gratifying.
Yeah, no, it's been great working with you all. How many layers do you think we've built so far, by the way?
I feel like we're at about like an 6-layer cake right now.
Six out of 100.
Think about where this committee started and the basis of knowledge that we had to develop and how much all of you have already absorbed just to be able to have these detailed conversations.
Yeah.
That part is really great.
Yeah,
Just
it's
how much
starting
you've
to
all
take
taken
shape.
this on.
Yeah, that's encouraging. Okay.
I always say, as you get older, people are like, oh, you should do Sudoku and stuff like that. I'm like, that's okay. I have the housing element. I have fire maps. I've got safety.
It's a lot to keep track of. All right, last thing on order of business is the approval of the minutes. I remember the word emotion. Can somebody make a motion to approve the minutes? Since we didn't have a 10-hour meeting, brain's still working.
I will move to approve.
All right, Sue, you making the motion? Sue's made the motion, Jeff's approved. I guess you're seconding, is it?
I will second the one. Sue
Thank
has
you.
moved to approve. I will second.
Thank you. Awesome. All right, minutes are approved. And I
I'm
guess,
sorry, through the chair, we do need to take public comment and then we need to have a
And
vote.
vote.
okay. Someday I'll remember all these things. Okay,
all
but I
right.
remember the word motion, so we're building. Okay,
Focus on the things that are most important. Staff will always remind you.
thank you. All right, I don't see any comments from the public at the moment. So why don't we do a vote to approve? What do we do? All right, everybody approve the minutes, raise your hands. Anybody opposed to approving the minutes? Jeff Alves had 2 hands. Okay, good, approved. And I think we're ready to adjourn the meeting. Great discussion tonight. Appreciate everybody's involvement and brain power on this. Thanks. Thanks to the staff. Great job again.
Yes.
Thank you,
Jocelyn. Thanks, everyone.
You're welcome.
Thanks,
Good night,
everyone.
everybody. Take care.
Good night.
Thanks, guys.